Many mattresses littered the dark corridor. They were bulging like they were hiding something underneath. Chingu used his hammer to yank one open. Inside the decayed mattress was a fake person made from pillows and bedsheets. The workmanship was rough, but one could just about make out the shape of a person. The scariest thing was that a human face, complete with eyes, nose and a wide mouth, had been painted on the pillow. It looked like the scribbling of a child, but it made the hairs on Chinji's arms rise. This shouldn't be. Chingu resisted the urge to smash it with the iron hammer and started to think. No matter what, the 24 mannequins at the haunted house are scarier and more real than these fake dolls. I felt zero fear being around those mannequins, but standing beside these dolls, I feel weirdly unsettled. He nudged the doll, and on the back of the pillow, an unfamiliar name was written Li Chunyen. Why is there a name? These dolls were not unlike those used by girls when playing house. They would use dolls to act as their parents or to represent someone they knew in real life. Chingu observed for about 2 minutes after spraying the doll's face with a handful of salt. The doll did not react in any way. Chingu walked away to peel out another mattress. Similarly, there was a doll made from bed sheets and a pillow. Zhang Qixi. There was another name behind the doll. Chingu looked at the corridor that was filled with mattresses, and a chill ran up his spine. There's a name behind each doll. Meaning they represent real people. The bloated mattresses looked like a mass grave, and Chen Ji's hand that gripped the hammer sweated. He felt like he would be much braver after completing this trial mission. He finished 2 packs of salt after walking just 20 or 30 meters. Reality proved that salt had no use against those haunted things. The uncomfortable feeling that suffused the corridor did not decrease. If anything, it had gotten stronger. I'll need to ration the last pack of salt. I can't be so cavalier with it anymore. Chingu would look over his shoulder every few steps. He was afraid of seeing a row of dolls following him, as was often the case in the scary movies he had seen. With his whole body tensed, Chingu made the decision that should a doll suddenly stand up, he would rush over and smash it into smithereens with the hammer and stab it with the cleaver. Calm down, there are many trump cards you haven't used yet. Chingu did not know whether he was saying this for the benefit of the viewers or himself. In any case, as he moved into the third sick hall, the popularity of his live stream also climbed at a scary speed. In contrast, Qin Guang's live stream had reached a bottleneck, and his viewership was slipping. The third sick hall was different from the other two because every room was a single room, but curiously enough, none of the rooms had any beds. It was like the place had never been used as a hospital before. Dr. Gao said that the third sick hall only has 10 sick rooms and 9 patients on record, so what are the purposes for these empty rooms? None of the rooms had a number, and they had the same bland white doors. They did not seem like they were used to house the patients. The first sick hall was so crowded that there were beds on the corridor, but the third sick hall has so many empty rooms. The hospital would rather keep them empty than use them for the patients. Why is that? Chingu was very careful. When he reached the middle of the 4th floor corridor, the stench in the air suddenly became exceedingly heavy. Other than the cold wind, there was another sound in his ears. It was hard to describe. It sounded like the heavy breathing of a roomful of people. Chingu shone his flashlight around as the anxiety in his heart heightened. He stuck his back to the wall and took out his phone to glance at the time. It's midnight. At that same moment, the sound of the door being opened came from one of the rooms under the 4th floor. The feeling was strange. The sound came from downstairs, but it sounded like it was just beside Chingu. The blood door inside the haunted house's mirror will open for a minute every midnight. Is there a similar door in this hospital? The door would appear at midnight, but it would not open on its own. When the door was pushed open, it only meant that something had come out from behind the door. Wang Haiming's diary said that he completed the final ritual in the bathroom. This proves that there is a large mirror in the bathroom of this hospital. After midnight, the entire sick hall seemed to change like a sleeping monster coming alive. Standing in the deepest corner of the fourth floor, Chen-gu looked down the stairs. There was complete darkness. No one knew what was hiding in the dark. Something might come out at him from a hidden corner. Chen-ji's eyes twitched. He held the hammer and stood at the mouth of the stairwell. After giving it some thought, he turned off his flashlight. Inside the third sick hall, there were mental patients, lingering spirits, and the monsters from behind the blood door. There were danger at every step. In such a situation, the light would expose himself, making him an easy target. Chen-gu closed his eyes before opening them again. He tried to make his eyes familiarize themselves with the darkness and stepped down the stairs to go to the third floor. Even though the mission had not ended, Chen-gu had already acquired a reward. At least his relationship with the white cat had improved. Initially, the white cat did not even want to be close to him, but after they entered the corridor of the third sick hall, the cat actively jumped on his shoulder, its claws digging into his clothes and backpack. It looked like it would not let go no matter what. "Don't be scared, everything is still under control." Chen-gu patted the cat on its head, and the cat strangely did not resist. Its pair of different colored eyes looked straight into the darkness. The staircase seemed to have grown in the darkness because Chen-gu used 2 minutes to move from the fourth floor to the third floor. The windows were sealed, and the third floor was even darker. Chen-gu could barely see the mattresses that littered the corridor. The twisted face seemed to vanish after he entered the third sick hall. There was not even a footprint. Where could he be hiding? Inside one of the rooms or the mattresses, preparing for an ambush? There was another nurse's station at the corner of the third floor, but curiously enough, all the records and medicine were arranged neatly inside the station, and the counter was spotless, like it had recently been in use. Jumping into the station, Chen-gu realized that there were many prescribed pills arranged on the table. The colorful pills were separated and placed inside white bags, and each bag was taped with a patient's name. Li Chunyan. Zhang Qisi. Wait, didn't I read these 2 names on the dolls on the fourth floor? Someone comes here every night to give medicine to the dolls. A ridiculous idea popped up in Chen-ji's mind. The third sick hall was like a children's game. The child had created the dolls to act as the patients and took on the role of the doctor to dispense the medicine. Who would do something so sick? Chen-gu looked at the names on the counter, and he felt like he had missed something important. Chen-gu examined the bags on the counter carefully, and his expression turned grim. He used his fingers to rub at the names, and he finally discovered the source of the problem. The writing on some of the bags was still wet, the names had been written recently. Chen-gu whipped his head up and looked around. There was no hiding spot inside the nurse's station. The person who prescribed the drug should still be close. They probably haven't wandered far and are still nearby. Chen-gu could not tell if the other party had discovered him, but he knew he had to be more careful. He jumped out of the station and slunk into the room opposite the nurse's station. He pushed the door open a sliver, and Chen-gu looked out into the corridor. The names on the bags were freshly written, so the pills were probably just prescribed. Who would do something like this at night? There were several candidates in Chen-ji's mind, and the foremost was the twisted face. He had once been a doctor at this hospital, and from the way he treated his father, he had a great need for revenge. He prescribed the drug to force-feed his victims. Then again, if this was true, he would not have needed to write the patient's name down on the bag one by one, so things could not have been that simple. It was midnight, and things were at their most unstable. Chen-gu decided to stay a little bit longer to clear up the mystery about the medicine before moving. About 10 minutes later, there was a fuzzy shadow that appeared at the end of the third-floor corridor. It was so far away that Chen-gu could not tell whether it had appeared from one of the rooms or from the other floors. Which patient is it? Chen-gu could not see the face, but he did not dare turn on the light. The only thing he could do was hide behind the door with the hammer ready. The shadow's gait was weird, it was staggering like it could trip and fall at any moment. As it got near, Chen-gu made another weird discovery. The thing made no sound as it walked across the floor. Based on the way it limps, it shouldn't be silent. The shadow got closer enough for Chen-gu to catch a rough glimpse of its clothes. The white nurse's outfit was rather conspicuous in the dark, and it was a contrast from the dirted mattresses that littered the place. It's not the twisted face but a woman. Chen-gu could not be sure. He leaned his upper body on the door, and his eyes attached themselves to the slit. He did not blink, afraid that he might lose any details. It's coming. The shadow with the nurse's outfit had its head lowered, and it was mumbling something quietly. When it neared the room Chen-gu was hiding in, the man finally got a good look. The moving shadow was a monster wearing a nurse's coat. Its waist was broken, and its limbs were twisted at weird angles. It felt as if someone had rearranged the monster's body, and it had lost the correct shape of a normal human. The monster before him ruined the wonderful image of nurses that Chen-gu had maintained for the past 20 years. Through the door, his hands that gripped the hammer started to sweat. The tangled black hair fell forward to hide most of her face, and when she passed Chen-ji's room, she suddenly stopped. At that moment, Chen-gu held his breath as he raised the hammer. The female nurse seemed to have felt something. She raised her skull slowly, and the hair parted to reveal that familiar face. It's her. The face could not have been more normal, but Chen-gu had the shock of his life because he recognized this face. He had seen it hanging in black and white in the second sick hall's activity room. Isn't she dead? The large female nurse was the victim who had died inside the third sick hall. According to Dr. Gao, after the police's investigation, they had concluded that the killer was one of the patients. She's still wandering the halls after her death. Chen-gu understood why there were no footsteps. His hand reached for the cleaver in his bag. After a second's hesitation, the nurse turned her body around with difficulty. As if toppling over, her large body leaned toward the door that Chen-gu was hiding behind. Dong! Her head knocking into the door created a dull thud. Chen-gu jumped back and yanked out the cleaver. The door was not locked, and Chen-gu was prepared to hash it out with this monster. However, right then, there was another sound of a door opening downstairs. Hearing this noise, the nurse was like a puppet being forced to turn around. She walked to the nurse's station and entered the small door next to it. What was that? Chen-ji's back was drenched. The female nurse was probably the bottom feeder at the third sick hall. She was a just lingering spirit without thought. The person who assigned her what to do was the real culprit. Chen-gu did not dare let his guard down. To not spook the nurse, he did not jump out with the cleaver lashing but hid behind the door to observe her quietly. After returning to the nurse's station, the nurse took out a notebook with dirt and blood stains from underneath the counter. She followed the content of the notebook and started arranging the bags that were filled with drugs. The nurse's station was opposite Chen-ji's room, so Chen-gu could see everything clearly. Her movements were quick and masterful. She soon picked up about 10 bags and wandered into the staircase to head up to the 4th floor. After the nurse had wandered off, Chen-gu exited the room. He jumped back into the nurse's station to examine the notebook that the nurse had been using earlier. The notebook was thick, and it was full of patient records and diagnosis reports. Chen-gu looked through it randomly, and he realized that all the patients in the book shared a similarity: they were all dead. For all the reports, in the box for diagnosis result, someone had used a red pen to correct everything and write confirmed dead. Have the killers hiding inside this hospital been following the patients? Or have the patients who once received treatment here returned to this place? Chen-gu saw Li Chunyan and Zhang Qixi's names in the notebook. He glanced at the counter, and the bags with their names had been taken away by the nurse. There are dolls on the 4th floor with these 2 names on their backs. All the patients who have passed away seem to have a corresponding doll in the 3rd sick hall, and there is a person who gives them their medication every night, like how it was when they were still alive. The mental hospital had been abandoned for 5 years already, but the third sick hall had remained in operation. It was just that the patients had changed from living ones to dead ones, and all these changes could be related to that mysterious door. Could it be that the door had been left open for so long that the world behind the door and the real world have overlapped? Chungu did not read the notebook further before tossing it inside his backpack. Then he walked down the corridor. He wanted to go take a look inside the third-floor bathroom before the nurse returned. After the nurse finishes handing out all the medicine, she will return. When she discovers that the notebook is missing, she will go searching for it, but it should be fine because I believe she is only slightly more powerful than Xiao Xiao and the pen spirit. If I face her in battle, I might not lose. Chungu held the hammer and walked deeper into the corridor. If this was some other person, they would have been shocked silly already, they would not have been able to calculate and plan their steps. Opening the rooms one by one, Chungu made no new discoveries until he reached the door to the third-floor bathroom. The sound of door opening came from downstairs, so this bathroom should not be where the door is. He could feel the anxiety coming from the white cat on his shoulder. Chungu tried to push the door open, and the bathroom was shrouded in complete darkness, swallowing up any sort of light. The row of squat cubicles looked rather frightening in the dark. Different from the school, the cubicles had no locks, probably in case of accidents inside the bathroom. Chungu did a tour but found nothing strange. He eventually stopped before the sink that had a mirror, and he realized how interesting the design was. There was a curtain draped on top of the mirror. With a pull, the mirror would be covered up easily. This little design quirk reminded Chungu slightly of his own haunted house. Looks like there are some problems with the mirrors here as well. Chungu pulled the curtain up, and the mirror was stained with smudges, like someone had run their hands over it. The surface was smudged with so many finger marks that Chungu could barely see his reflection. The door is not here, Chungu confirmed after making sure the layout of the third-floor bathroom. He came out from the bathroom and used the adjacent staircase to walk down to the second floor. The closer he got to the first floor, the stronger the stench in the air became. The thing that surprised Chungu was that some curious things had appeared on the second floor's corridors and walls. It was unknown whether it was caused by the building's old age or some other reason, but there were patches along the corridor where it protruded outward. The protrusions had red hues to them like the color of bruised skin. The cracked floor also had residual liquid that looked like it was blood. It was as if blood had once seeped from cracks and had now dried. The second floor was completely different from the third floor. The danger rating had practically doubled. If the third floor was eerie, then the second floor was dangerous, it just made people want to turn and run. Could this really be real blood? Chungu picked up something that looked like congealed blood off the floor and squished it in his hands. It doesn't smell bloody, probably just normal red soil. The mattresses on the corridor were rather in the way, and as Chungu walked past them, he yanked some open. He realized that the closer he got to the first floor, the more authentic these dolls looked. It was not that they were visually more authentic, but they gave off a stronger feeling that they were alive. When I enter the first floor, will the dolls and the mattresses crawl out on their own? He was not kidding and was considering this possibility seriously. Walking past room after room as he proceeded down the corridor, Chungu noticed a few special rooms as he was about to turn the corner. All the patients' rooms had windows on their doors so that the doctors could see inside easily, but these few rooms were different. The director's office? Chungu had pretty much finished exploring the mental hospital, and this was the first time he had come across a door with a plaque on it. He entered the room, and the space was huge. It had been made from breaking down the walls between three normal rooms. There were several pots of dead plants against the wall, and next to them were empty bookshelves and an office table. There was also a resting area. It was about half the size of the working area, and it had a single bed and a disproportionately large dresser. Closing the door behind him, Chungu stepped into the room. The floor was littered with a massive number of patient records, but these records were different from the ones in the nurse's notebook. They were unedited. In other words, these patients were probably still alive. The mental hospital had been in operation for at least 10 years, and the number of patients that came through its door was huge, at least much bigger than Chen Gu anticipated. Compared to Zhejiang's population of several million, the number of mental patients was probably very small, but Zhejiang only had 2 certified government mental hospitals, and even at their maximum capacity, they could only handle about 1,000 people. This, combined with the fact that mental illnesses required repeated treatment, meant that there were not enough hospitals to go around. This was why there were private hospitals like Zhejiang Third Psychological Convalescence Center. It had the necessary certification, but at the end of the day, it was a private hospital. Their main focus was money, and their management was riddled with problems. Due to the nature of mental patients, many things were not treated with the seriousness that they deserved. Accepting Wang Haiming even though he was mentally fine was one such example. After picking up a few of the patient's records, Chen Gu soon lost interest. The diagnoses given were pretty much the same, even the treatment methods were similar to each other. A real doctor is someone like Dr. Gao. These doctors were merely trying to silence the patient's wills and souls, transforming them into puppets without individuality. Chen Gu continued his search. The bookshelves and table drawers were empty. Chen Gu entered the rest area and flipped the bed upside down. There was nothing. Finally, he turned toward the suspiciously large dresser. This was the only place he had not searched. This dresser is big enough to fit 2 adults. Could the missing director be left inside? Raising his hammer, he scanned the dresser. The dresser was sealed with police tape, and it had not been taken down since it was applied because the edges were untouched. Why would the police seal the dresser? Was it hiding the body? There were many other curious things about the dresser. Its 4 edges were taped with duct tape, and curious mantras were written on the corners. There were also red nails that were about half the length of a normal palm protruding out of the dresser. It just feels like this dresser carries something important inside. Chen Gu hugged the white cat and placed it down by the door. He removed the police tape and used the mallet to pry the door open. There was no scary scene, and the dresser was not filled with clothes or anything weird. Inside sat a few papers that were filled with words and several envelopes that had not been mailed. Picking up the topmost paper, the first line that entered Chen Ji's eyes made his heart jump. The kid inside room 3 is acting up again. He is the first person to have seen the door, so I suspect the appearance of the door is related to him. Wasn't room 3 empty? Where did this kid come from? Chen Gu continued to read, and the letters inside the dresser explained how the single door had caused the ruination of the entire mental hospital. Zhejiang Third Psychological Convalescence Center was opened 23 years ago. It was the earliest private mental hospital in Zhejiang. From the name, it was clear that they were not a government body but a private convalescence center. The center had 3 sick halls, and the admission fee at the first sick hall was much cheaper than government hospital, but the conditions were extremely bad. The second sick hall's fees were 20% higher than normal, but there were specialized nurses and doctors. The third sick hall was only open to a small number of patients. The fee was extremely high, several times the price of a normal room. From the notes left behind by the director, the situation when the center was first built was completely different from how it was later. At the beginning, the third sick hall was not a sealed-up area. In fact, it was the place with the best environment and highest price. The center operated for 3 months before they received a special patient. The director recorded the scenario in detail. That day was probably a turning point for him. A car with foreign plates arrived at the center, and 2 men helped an incredibly pregnant woman out from the back seat. The director came to welcome them personally. After some questions, he realized that the woman had a serious mental illness. Due to safety concerns for the mother and the baby, the director rejected their admission. The man seemed to have predicted this, and he offered a fee that was 10 times higher than the already high asking price of the third sick hall. He told the director that he would pay for half a year of treatment at once. Looking at the mountain of cash on the table, the director and the doctors were swayed. After the center went into operation, the first and second sick halls were filled to the brim, but most of the rooms in the third sick hall were left empty. After all, most rich patients would select official government mental hospitals to seek treatment. With some coaxing from the doctors, the director finally admitted the pregnant woman and assigned her the third room of the third sick hall. After making sure that the woman had settled in, the man left the director with his phone number and claimed that he was the woman's husband. However, when the director asked to see their marriage certificate, the man could not produce it. Nevertheless, since he had accepted the money, the director could not do anything about it. It was too late for regret. All he could do was take good care of the woman. After the initial diagnosis, it was found that the pregnant woman did suffer from a mental illness, bipolar disorder. She refused to communicate and would cry one moment and be consumed by rage the next. She slammed things that she could see and would sometimes injure herself. To keep her safe, the doctors baby-proofed everything inside room 3. The woman's illness was unstable, but due to her pregnancy, most medication could not be used. The only thing the doctors could do was psychological counseling. 3 months passed just like that, and it was close to her due date. The hospital hired several nurses to watch over her 24 hours a day. It was unknown whether it was the coming baby that had elicited the woman's motherly nature or the effects of the counseling sessions, but the woman stopped acting up. She did not like human contact and spent most of her time touching her stomach, talking to herself. 4 months later, the child was born, and the woman's condition improved tremendously. The director and doctors sighed in the relief, and that day, they called the husband, but there was no answer. A bad feeling appeared in their heart, and they hired a special PI to investigate the man's identity. It turned out that all of his documentation was fake. After a discussion between the director and the doctors, they decided that if the man failed to show up after his money had run out, they would call the police. Considering the woman's condition, they did not tell her about this. The woman recollected her hope in life after the baby was born and started to provide her full cooperation. She wanted to get better for her child. She would also ask about her husband because in her mind, after she was cured, her husband would return. However, half a year later, the man's money had dried up, and the man seemed to have disappeared off the face of the earth. There were 2 different voices inside the hospital. Some doctors and nurses suggested to have the mother and son transferred away. Taking care of both for free was too much work. The director, out of his compassion, asked them to wait a little longer, but the nurse who took care of the woman accidentally let this information slip. The woman demanded to talk to her husband, and all she got was the emotionless machine operator telling her that the number she was calling was no longer in use. Before sending the woman into the center for treatment, there appeared to have been a pact between the woman and the man. Now that the pact had been broken, the woman's condition deteriorated. She started to turn hostile to everyone around her. She was lost inside a dark maze and could not find a way out. To prevent the woman from hurting her own son, the doctor removed the baby from her care. The woman lost her mind and refused to communicate. The baby was too small, and the hospital could not just adopt him for her. They tried their best to cure the woman, hoping to get information on the man from her, to make him pay for the remaining of the fee. No one would have thought that this treatment would go on for 3 years. The woman's child grew up inside the mental hospital, and he learned how to walk and talk in this place that was filled with crazies. The first 3 years of a child's life was called the baby period. It was when a human picked up the most information, and it formed the foundation for the child's future. The woman's child spent these formative years inside this twisted and complicated environment. The money had already run out, so the hospital was taking care of them out of kindness. It was fine for 1 or 2 days, but as the days dragged on, the sound of complaints grew, and even the workers' eyes started to change when they saw the child. The crazy mother was locked inside her room, and the thing the child did the most in those 3 years was ask the doctors or nurses to carry him to room 3. He would lean against the window on the door and look into the room at the woman. When the child learned how to walk, he would sometimes wander over to room 3 on his own, looking at the door that was several times bigger than he was. Days rolled into weeks and weeks into months. Other children of his age had family and friends. Their lives were filled with colors, but the world in this child's eyes were different. Whitewashed hospital walls filled most of his memory, and sooner or later, he acted different from how a normal child would. Chingu had unwillingly read to the end. The letter was like the director's personal diary. This child's childhood is even sadder than mine. He had thought that his own childhood of playing with mannequin heads and plastic bones was sad enough, but here was someone who had it worse. Putting down the letter, Chingu turned to look at the not yet mailed envelopes. The envelopes had no stamps and were not addressed. They were yellow from age and seemed to have been written years ago. Chingu opened them according to chronological order. The first letter was written 20 years ago. At the time, the woman's child had only been 2. Dr. Chen, this is the first time I've come across such a brilliant child. He picks up stuff at a superhuman rate. Being born in a hidden corner of the place, growing up in a sick environment, should I send him away? The child will definitely be a genius in the future, but his various reactions make me worry. Ever since he learned how to talk, just like his mother, he has talked to himself. No, it feels more like he is communicating with something we can't see. The doctors and nurses are very busy, and there is no one who is free to teach him to speak other than me, but I keep hearing strange words coming from his lips. Did he pick those up from hearing the doctors and nurses? Or is someone else teaching him? I'm materialistic, but seeing what happened to the kid has swayed my conviction. According to rumors, a toddler can see things that adults cannot. Is that true? I'm curious about everything with regards to this child, but I am also worried about knowing too much. The kid is like a swamp, the closer you get, the greater the alert in your mind. The mother has bipolar disorder, and only when she is in the company of her son will she not act up. To facilitate treatment, the doctors bring the son to see her often. Every child has a natural reliance on their mothers. Even though he is so small, he knows that is his mother. However, the weirdest thing was, when the child saw his mother, the first thing he said wasn't mom or his own name but door. Initially, I thought that I was mistaken, or maybe it was just a meaningless mumble by the child, but when the nurse carried him away, he used his tiny finger to point at the door to her mother's room and repeated the same word door. He seemed to be telling us that he wants to get close to that door. This is the most curious thing because I've asked the whole hospital, and no one has taught him that word before. Without guidance, he managed to vocalize the word and even knew what it meant. Who told him this? Is there really something else inside the hospital? Then, it became even weirder. When the nurse who carried the child and I entered room 3 to see his mother, the child looked down the corridor and waved his arms like he was greeting someone. I was sure that there was no one other than us in that corridor. Of course, if that was all, I wouldn't have been so worried. The nurse also noticed this, so she asked him what he was doing. Who was he waving at? At the time, the child stammered this name Hyejun. The nurse didn't know what it meant and assumed that the child was just working on his vocal cords. She did not take it to heart and continued to carry the child away. At the time, I really wanted to stop her because Hyejun was a real person. Before the 3rd sick hall was built, a construction worker had an accident, and that person's name was Hyejun. This was something even the doctors and nurses did not know, so how did he come up with that name? I stood at the door and saw the nurse carry the child away. When she went up the stairs, the child once again waved at the corner that was empty. Honestly, I've treated many children with mental illnesses, but I've never been afraid. However, that day, in that corridor, I was gripped by intense fear. After that incident, I paid closer attention to the boy. That was the end of the first letter. Until the end, the director did not mention who the letter was addressed to. Chingu finished the whole thing, and the only thing relevant to the identity of the addressee was the Dr. Chen at the beginning. Surname Chen. Could it be Dad? But he's a haunted house operator, not a doctor. Chen-gu was initially glad that he had found a clue related to his parents, but he thought about it and believed that he was being a bit too optimistic. He opened the second letter, and the content was even more unbelievable. Dr. Chen, we have to meet in person. Things are getting slightly out of control. When the child learned how to crawl, he would actively go find his mother. No one in the third sick hall knew how he managed to leave the office and end up outside the door of room 3. The other nurses and doctors have also noticed the weird behavior of the child. He rarely cries and smiles at random places. He gets more excited as the day darkens, and he is very much not acting like a normal child. He has great learning ability, and even at such a young age, he can vocalize his words clearly even though the things that leave his lips often make chills run down people's spines. Perhaps the world in the child's eyes is different from ours. He sees the patients who take tranquilizers and sleeping pills as toys, and the way he looks at them is like they are already dead. He also waves and face patients who have lost their mind, but he never looks them in the face. Instead, he looks at the area above their shoulder like there is something about the patient's shoulders. The weirdest thing is that he likes to go sit outside room 3. He never goes into it, he just sits there, staring at the door. A whole afternoon could pass with him doing just that. Some doctors and nurses suggested that we send the child to an orphanage. They were spooked by this kid, but sending him away would influence the mother's recovery. We have used a year to stabilize his mother's condition, and we cannot give up now. I rejected the doctor's suggestion, and after several months, there was good news from the police. Using the car plate as a lead, they found the boy's biological father down south. At the time, the mother's condition had mostly been cured. We hired a lawyer to bring the father to court, demanding that he pay for the hospital and treatment fee and, at the same time, give the child's mother an official marriage and name. We won the case. It was unclear whether the fear of prison or guilt changed the father. Everything was improving positively, and the mother was getting better. The young woman showed exceptional strength when she was before her son. The treatment continued for another half a year, and the mother's illness had fully stabilized. She did not have many friends or family, so other than the few doctors who sent her away, her departure did not cause much of an effect. The child left with his mother, but the 3 years growing up at the mental hospital have left their scars already. The night before he left, he snuck back to the corridor and kept saying things that people could not understand to the door. After they left, I assumed everything was over, but who would have thought things would progress down a completely unexpected route? Just 1 year later, when the child was 4, he was sent back to the center by his father. According to his father, the woman was killed at home, and the child witnessed the whole process. When I saw the child again, he had changed a lot. The only pillar in his life had crumbled, and his condition was similar to how his mother was when she first arrived. Due to previous reasons in history, our center didn't dare admit him. We persuaded the father to send him to an official hospital instead. On the night that we rejected him, right at midnight, the white door of room 3 started to leak blood. This lasted for 1 whole minute before it stopped. When I found out about this, it was 1 week later, and within that 1 week, many unbelievable things have happened at the hospital. The second letter stopped her abruptly. Reading the letter's content and the director's description, Chen-gu was reminded of someone who experienced the exact same thing. He opened the third letter urgently, and inside was a picture with the mother and her son. When Chen-gu saw this picture, he was overwhelmed by emotion. This was because he had seen this picture before. It was the same picture he had seen when he was helping Dr. Gao pack up Men Nan's belongings at Hai Ming Apartments. A woman with the patient's garb was leaning on the bed, and a shy little boy sat next to her. The woman in the picture had no makeup, and she looked like she had just recovered from a big illness. There was a unique charm to her. Earlier, at Hai Ming Apartments, Chen-gu had criticized Men Nan's father for having an affair even though his wife was so beautiful, and now he understood why. Chen-gu moved his gaze to study the shy boy in the picture. Is this child really Men Nan? An incredibly talented child when he was still a baby, but how come he could not handle a mere mirror monster after he grew up? Did his talent shrink as he grew older? The story told in the letter was real. Chen-gu did hear people say that toddlers could see many weird things that adults could not, but as they grew up, everything returned to normal, and the memory that they had disappeared. It shouldn't be so simple. Chen-gu was reminded of what Dr. Gao told him. After a deep diagnosis, he discovered there were 3 personalities within Men Nan. The first was a self-protecting personality that appeared in the shape of his mother. This was probably the lingering spirit of Men Nan's mother. She had attached herself to Men Nan to protect him whenever she could. The second was Men Nan's main personality. This persona grew up with him, and it was the normal Men Nan that his friends knew. The last personality hid in the deepest recesses of Men Nan's mind. According to Dr. Gao, this personality had stuck at Men Nan's childhood years. He refused to communicate, and the period when he appeared was extremely short. When the third persona appeared, Men Nan would display superhuman talent. Is it possible that the third persona is the real Men Nan? Then what exactly happened to him? What caused this persona to appear? Before entering the third sick hall, Chen-gu had studied up on this. He was familiar with split personality disorder, and he knew that the appearance of each persona had a specific reason behind it. Perhaps it was loneliness, or perhaps it was self-defense mechanism. Chen-gu had no idea why Men Nan's third persona had appeared, but he had a feeling that it was related to the door at the third sick hall. Putting the picture back into the envelope, Chen-gu started to read the third letter. The door appears punctually at midnight. It stays for a minute before disappearing. I've sealed up the third sick hall and forbidden anyone from getting close to room 3 at night. I've asked the nurses on night patrol to keep an eye on that bleeding door. 3 days have passed, and the nurses told me there was a weird noise coming from behind the door. When the door returned to normal, she pushed the door open, and the room was empty. There wasn't a rat as she had expected. On the 4th day, I stayed vigil by the door personally. There were indeed movements behind the door, and I could hear the sound of chewing. On the 5th night, the thing behind the door seemed to have sensed something. There was knocking coming from behind the door. There was knocking from a room that was confirmed to be empty. If not for the fact that I have just concluded a mental test, I would have thought I was crazy. I used wooden boards to seal up the door, and on the 10th night, there was urgent banging on the door. Fresh blood seeped through the door, dyeing it red. It was like a scene from a nightmare. I've contacted the workers to remove the door and asked a few doctors to watch the door outside room 3. On the midnight of the 11th day, everyone present could hear the door being opened. The sound came from room 3 even though the door was already gone. When the sound occurred, I saw the door frame dyed red. I managed to take a close look. It was not blood but something that looked like blood vessels. 1 minute later, everything returned to normal, and one of the doctors said that he saw a shadow crawl out of the room. Said doctor handed in his resignation that afternoon. The hospital was running low on staff, so I denied his request. It only made his emotions run wild. There was no room for negotiation at all. Removing the door was useless, so I asked the workers to seal it up with bricks. In the initial few days, the method seemed to be effective, but 1 week later, there was a new problem with room 3. Whenever midnight arrived, room 3, even the walls next to it, started to turn red like bruised skin. The red was spreading, and I fear that, one day, it will cover the entire hospital. I've used every method that I can think of, but I cannot stop it. This room was fine, and everything happened after the accident that befell the child's mother. Do you think I should find the boy? To find the solution or reason from him? Chen Ji's face was dark after reading the third letter. This door was much more troublesome than he had anticipated. The old director had used all sorts of methods, but he had still failed. He had not only failed to close the door, but he had exacerbated the situation. But there has to be a solution, or else the center would have closed 10 years ago and not just 5 years ago. Chen-gu picked up the last letter, and his expression turned serious. This was because the last envelope had something others did not, an address. It was addressed to Linjiang New Schistosomiasis Control Station. Chen-gu, I followed your instructions, and thankfully, the door is temporarily closed. But I don't understand, why can Nan close the door? The letter was short, but it revealed two important facts to Chen-gu. 1. The door could be closed. 2. Nan was the key to closing it. Looks like I'll need Nan's help if I want to deal with the door in the mirror at my haunted house. Chen-gu read the short fourth letter again. At the very end, the old director has shown interest in the world behind the door. Could the reason for his disappearance be related to that? The center had been closed 5 years ago, and before it was sealed up, the director had disappeared. These two incidents had to be related. Replacing the letters, Chen-gu looked at the dresser. Something is not right. The letters weren't stamped. The earlier 3 letters did not even have an address, so they could not have been mailed. How did the director communicate with this Dr. Chen? Furthermore, why would the mailed letters return to the director's office? Chen-gu narrowed his eyes as several possibilities entered his mind. Could it be that the director also suffered from split personality disorder and one of his personas was this Dr. Chen? Or had the mysterious Dr. Chen who received the letters returned to the hospital after the director's disappearance and purposefully left the letters here? But why would he do that? Chen-gu only ended up with more questions. Who is this Dr. Chen? Chen-gu thought about it before putting the letter with the address into his shirt pocket. There was nothing else in the dresser. After closing the door, Chen-gu snapped a few pictures of the dresser. There are 4 blood-red nails on the 4 corners of the dresser, and every gap was sealed with clear cellophane. The fact that the cupboard could be preserved in the 3rd sick hall for so long has got to do with this unique setting. Chen-gu tried to yank the nail out, but he failed after giving it a try. The 4 nails were stuck deep into the corners. It was as if they were already joined to the dresser. There is something unique about these 4 nails. I should return in the morning to pull them out. Chen-gu had stayed for far too long inside the director's office, so he had no idea what was happening outside. When he stepped out from the resting area, the white cat jumped onto his shoulder and refused to get down no matter what. Chen-gu nudged himself carefully toward the office door. He did not dare to go out directly, afraid that the nurse or the twisted face was hiding at the corner to ambush him. With the hammer raised, Chen-gu leaned against the door to listen for weird noises coming from outside. 10 seconds passed, and he did hear something weird. The sound of doors opening and closing reverberated down the corridor, like someone was inspecting the rooms one by one. Chen-gu pushed the office door slightly, and in the corridor that seemed to reach into the endless dark, there was something swaying in the inky darkness. The shadow gradually gathered its shape as it flitted in and out of the rooms. That's a white nurse's outfit. Is she looking for her notebook? Chen-gu gripped the hammer. He was considering whether to face the nurse head-on or temporarily retreat. The nurse's body was very twisted, and this caused her to have a staggering gait since she could barely maintain her balance. Even so, she was moving at a quick speed. Viewed from afar, it was quite scary. She appeared to have discovered me on the 3rd floor. If not for the opportune sound of a door opening, we would have been involved in an altercation. Keeping her around means another dangerous element for me to worry about. In that case, I should use the notebook as bait and take care of her while I still have the element of surprise. Chen-gu was as calm as he could be. He was coming up with the solution that was the most beneficial to him. The director's office is large. Even if I fail to kill her with one hit, there's enough space for me to continue the aggression. It's also the perfect opportunity to see whether the cleaver is useful against these things. Chungu placed the notebook before the dresser, put away the letters, and climbed into the dresser to hide with the cat. He adjusted himself until he found a comfortable position. After several minutes, the door to the office was opened. The nurse saw the notebook easily. However, she did not rush in to take it immediately. She seemed to be cautious of the dresser. She hesitated for quite some time before staggering into the room. Chen-Ji's eyes caught the nurse's every movement. When she bent down to take the notebook, Chungu saw his opportunity, blasted the door open and swung the hammer right at the nurse. The hammer fell on the nurse, and her already misshapen body became even more distorted. Not giving her a chance to recover, Chungu grabbed the cleaver from his backpack. The red cloth fell to the ground as Chungu stuck the blade into the nurse's outfit. There was a sharp sound beside his ears. The nurse's clothes were split open, and even though there was no blood, it was clear that a part of the nurse's body had gone missing. This cleaver is usable. The nurse's dead face changed. It was filled with pain and anger. She opened her jaws wide to bite at Chen-Ji's face, shrieking. Chungu raised the cleaver to defend himself, but he had underestimated the nurse's aggression level. This thing was different from a normal human being. Even though the cleaver struck her body, her movement did not slow. If anything, she moved faster. The cleaver dealt some damage to the nurse, but the nurse also got close to her target. Her ugly face was inches away. Chungu was seconds away from certain death. At that moment, the white cat on his shoulder suddenly jumped onto the nurse's face. The stray cat was vicious. The nurse's attack was halted, and she changed target to bite at Chen-Ji's arm. The nurse was very aggressive. Chungu weaved left and right to evade her attacks. There was a cling on his wrist like something had fallen off. He did not pay the sound any attention. He focused fully on doing damage to the nurse's body using the cleaver. Even though there was no blood, the nurse's size was visibly shrinking, and her form started to waver. After who knew how many cuts, the nurse completely disappeared, and the torn-up nurse's outfit fell to the floor. It's over. Before he could celebrate, there was commotion coming from the corridor. Something seemed to be heading his way, and the number of new pursuers sounded to be quite high. Can't stay here any longer. I'll be dead if I'm surrounded here. Chungu grabbed his backpack, and holding the cleaver and hammer on each hand, he made a hasty retreat. He ran until he reached the staircase. He was about to catch his breath when the phone in his pocket vibrated. Mission success alert. Chungu saw the message, and he felt cheated. The vibration was a call from Lu Dao. I'll need to remind them not to call me during my live stream. This might be the cause of my death if I'm not careful. Chungu answered the call with a whisper. I'm hanging up if there's nothing important. Quick look at your live stream room. Lu Dao sounded quite excited. Huh. Chungu clicked his page open, and he got quite a shock when he saw the number. His viewer count had shot up to 300,000. And the number was still climbing. It would pass 400,000 in just a few minutes. What's going on? Is something wrong with the platform? Seeing the rising number, Chungu decided to change the livestream's name to the address of his haunted house and added an explanation in the information box. Nothing's wrong with the platform, but something's definitely wrong with Qin Guang. After entering a classroom in Muyang High School, his visuals suddenly turned black. No one knows what happened. I initially thought this was some kind of special effect, but the screen stayed black for as long as 25 minutes. For a professional live stream, even 5 minutes without an image is a tragedy. This can only mean one thing: some kind of accident must have happened to his team. The more he said, the more excited he got. This is a gift from the heavens. The entire platform planned to promote a supernatural live stream because of him, but most of the viewers only got a black screen. They went to search for similar content, and since only the two of you are doing this, and the key point being that your live stream content and quality are much higher than his. Most of the viewers came and never left. After hearing the cause and effect from Lu Dao, based on the trajectory of the viewership so far, getting to 500,000 was not impossible, and that was a dream for a newbie host like Chen Gu. A rocket rise in popularity was something that Chen Gu did not expect. I've already given Qin Guang the warning, but he refused to listen, so I can't be blamed. Thankfully, Muyang High School isn't that dangerous, and the ghosts there aren't evil, so he should be fine. Chen Gu still felt like he was a kind person. Hopefully, he'll speedily recover and will think twice before plagiarizing other people's content again. Chen Gu made use of this opportunity to promote his haunted house. He believed that many viewers would remember the name of Western Zhejiang's House of Horrors from this live stream. Popularity was like rising bread. In the foreseeable future, there should be a continuous stream of viewers who would come to pay him a visit. Chen Gu, I'll need to talk to you about drafting a new contract. Also, I have a question to ask. Lu Dao did not hang up. He was under a lot of pressure as well. You have arranged this entire live stream, right? The whole setting is controlled and operated by the team at your haunted house. Lu Dao did not know that much about Chen Gu even though they were partners. He knew that Chen Gu owned a haunted house, so it was not uncommon for the boss to know professional actors and have the ability to design the most authentic scary experience. For someone who did not believe in the occult, he had to explain the situation with logic when he came across supernatural incidents. I suppose so. Chen Gu gave a vague answer. He did have a team back at the haunted house, but other than Su Wan, the rest of the cast could not be revealed. I knew you are not in there alone. Lu Dao sighed. Earlier, the camera on your wrist fell. After you ran out, the camera on the floor suddenly started to move, and after Sister Li saw it, she thought an actual ghost had arrived. What? Chen Gu whipped his head to look at his wrist. Indeed, the camera had fallen, probably when he was tussling with the nurse. Look, it's moving again. Chen Gu silenced the chat log and turned to look at the video on the right-hand corner. The video corresponded to the wrist camera. The video was moving forward, and the camera seemed to be hanging on the nurse's outfit. It was moving toward Chen Gu. It's still alive after the punishment I put her through. Is it due to the unique environment? Lu Dao did not know how serious it was and gave Chen Gu some serious advice. You'd better contact your friend and tell him to not appear before the camera. This will give the viewers a greater sense of anticipation. What anticipation? After hanging up, Chen Gu ran up the stairs immediately. The live stream showed two different camera angles, and one was running away from the other. This was something new for the viewers and for Chen Gu as well. He rushed into the third-floor corridor. After running a few feet, Chen Gu lowered his head to glance at his phone. He saw his back. She has caught up to me. Without a way to deal with the nurse permanently, Chen Gu ran into the staircase and down back to the second floor. After losing the nurse, he changed his direction and flew down to the first floor. The nurse was chasing after him on instinct. After losing Chen Gu, she repeated her action of inspecting every room. The nurse is different from the mirror monster, she has no will. It is as if she has melded herself with the environment. After the nurse left, Chen Gu climbed out of his hiding spot. This level was where everything started. The stench is now even thicker. The corridor of the first floor was different from other floors. In the cracks on the ground, there was things that looked like worms wiggling. There were faded red bruises on the walls, and after peeling a section of the wall off, Chen Gu discovered that the red had seeped into the wall. It felt like he was examining the skin of a living person. The director's letters mentioned something similar, but he said that the weird changes were limited to the walls adjacent to room 3. There were 10 rooms on the first floor, corresponding to the 10 patients. Chen Gu nudged closer to the door nearest to him. The door to room 10 was made of steel. Instead of a sick room, it looked more like a prison. Chen Gu tried many ways, but the door did not even budge. The quality is good. Even after so many years, there are no signs of it getting loose. The patient in room 10 was known as the devil. Even though Dr. Gao said that the patient probably would have died from his disease already, there were always exceptions to the rule. That night, Chen-gu had met quite a few patients from the third sick hall already, perhaps patient number 10 was still alive. Room 8 and 9 were also equipped with steel doors. Chen-gu could not open them without creating a huge commotion. It was no time for sightseeing, so Chen-gu rushed to room 3. The wall was peeling off, and something that looked like blood was leaking from inside the walls. The dolls were half exposed from underneath the mattresses. It felt like they would reach out to grab his legs at any moment. Every corner of the corridor was filled with bruises, and when Chen-gu touched it, lines that looked suspiciously like blood vessels appeared. It was a weird feeling, it felt like it was the building itself that was bleeding. The stench in the air was so thick that it had gotten uncomfortably pungent. Suppressing the rising nausea, Chen-gu walked toward room 3. When he was close enough, he finally saw the door. It was a door that was completely dyed red with blood. It was half open, and there was a no-entry sign hanging on the doorknob. This is the door that has ruined this hospital. It was not until when he saw the door that it dawned on him how dangerous his situation was. Chen-gu moved his legs forcibly forward, the cleaver and hammer in his hands giving him zero security. Every cell in his body was screaming for him to leave, but there was also a voice at the back of his brain calling him to move forward, hurrying him. With the hair on his body standing up, Chen-gu finally stopped at the door of room 3. In the dark corridor, a door sat quietly amid the blood-dyed walls. It was like the heart of the third sick hall, and everything revolved around it. Will this happen to the door in my haunted house if I leave it be? Chen-gu looked into room 3 through the gap. The ceiling, walls, bed, everything Chen-gu could see was red. Even though it was just a door, it was the separation between two drastically different worlds. He reached out to touch the door, hoping to close it. However, when he moved the door, a familiar noise entered his ears. He had heard this noise at the haunted house before. It was the sound of something heavy being dragged. When he heard this sound, Chen-gu did not hesitate and slammed the door closed. With his hand around the lock, a chill snuck into his palm and spread throughout his body. He froze outside the door and focused his attention on locating the source of the noise. It definitely came from inside the door, but I'm unable to ascertain which direction. The image of a masked monster dragging a body down the corridor appeared in Chen Ji's mind. The sound drew closer until it suddenly stopped. Chen Ji's muscles were tensed. It was a curious feeling. The door before him was like a mirror. The two worlds reflected each other, and the monster was standing where Chen-gu was. There was just a door between them, and neither party dared do anything rash. Eerie winds blew down the corridor. For minutes later, there was the sound of a door opening coming from the second floor. The female nurse seemed to have caught up to him. Things were not looking good for Chen-gu. The nurse was coming, but he was caught in a situation where he could not move an inch. The monster on the other side of the door had sensed probably him. If he made any abrupt movements, the monster might come out from the door. This was a silent competition. The monster inside the door was hesitating. Outside the door, Chen-gu did not have a plan to face the monster yet. His biggest goal then was to find something to temporarily close the door and survive the night at the hospital. The nurse, who had finished inspecting the third and second floors, finally arrived at the first floor. The nurse seemed to have been a vengeful person when she was alive because when she saw Chen-gu, she started running toward him in her tipsy gait. In a dark hall within an enclosed sick hall, a madwoman in a tattered nurse outfit was charging at him. This was a scary scene indeed. Chen Ji's arms were covered in green veins, and he looked at the encroaching nurse out of the corner of his eyes. I've already given you the notebook, so why are you still chasing me? If this was another place and another time, Chen-gu would not have panicked, but the monster inside the door had put him under too much pressure. He had heard the voice and had never seen the monster behind the door, and the fear of the unknown was always the biggest. The nurse was relentless. With her claws lashing, she soon arrived within 10 meters of Chin-gu. The wounds caused by the cleaver had recovered, and the nurse's misshapen body had solidified plenty. Chin-gu could even see the camera hanging on the nurse's lapel. Don't push it. When the nurse was 5 meters from Chin-gu, he made a quick decision. Between the two, he picked the weaker one. He would deal with the nurse first before taking on the thing inside the door. Chin-gu slowly pulled his hands back from the door, and when the nurse was close enough, Chin-gu rammed into her with a speed that was faster than she was. The hammer swung freely, and Chin-gu assaulted the nurse like he was a crazed person. In reality, other than being a little bit hard to kill, the nurse was not that powerful. When the cleaver cut into the woman's body, Chin-gu did not continue his aggression. He knew that the bigger threat came from behind him. While Chin-gu and the nurse were caught in the altercation, the door to room 3 started to bleed. Something that looked like blood slid down the door before disappearing when it hit the ground. A powerful force was nudging the door open from the inside. The door creaked as it slowly opened. The thing is coming out. Those few seconds were not enough to fully deal with the nurse, and Chin-gu found himself caught between a rock and a hard place. The nurse seemed to hate him a lot as she curled her twisted body around him, trying to constrict him like a boa. With a bigger threat behind him, Chin-gu steeled his heart. He struggled loose from the nurse and whacked the nurse heavily on her back. The hammer given by the black phone had a debilitative effect on ghosts, and this was proven when the hammer landed on the nurse's body. Chin-gu hit the nurse on the same spot, and the nurse got tossed forward, landing between Chin-gu and the blood door. The door was already half open, and something was coming out. This is not where you belong. Chin-gu carried on his attack. The normal method could not kill the nurse, so he tried the only method available. He planned to force the nurse into the blood door, and perhaps that might close the door. Things went smoother and much scarier than Chin-gu anticipated. When the nurse neared the door, a hairy hand reached out from the half-open door. The hand reached for the location Chin-gu was standing at earlier. During his fight with the nurse, Chin-gu had purposely traded his original position with the nurse. The palm grabbed the nurse and powerfully yanked backwards. The nurse's face was twisted, and she barely had the chance to struggle before she was pulled into the door. Seeing this, Chin-gu ran forward and slammed the door shut. He put all his weight against the door to block it from opening. Bang! There was slamming from behind the door. Chin-gu had experienced a similar thing at his haunted house, but the difference was, the door at the haunted house only existed for a minute, but the one at the hospital might persist until dawn. Bang! Something slammed into the door heavily. It caused Chin-ji's back to go numb. Just what kind of monster is behind the door? Why is it so powerful? He did not know the method to close the door, and there was nothing around to help him block the entrance. The worst thing was that the door slamming might attract more monsters. This door has to be closed, even if just temporarily. If not, I might not be able to survive to see the sun rise tomorrow morning. Chin-gu forced himself to calm down. With his back to the door, he pulled out his phone to call Dr. Gao. Please pick up. It was answered after 4 rings. Dr. Gao's voice drifted through the phone. Chin-gu. Probably due to a signal problem, Dr. Gao's voice came intermittently, and this only made Chin-gu feel more nervous. Dr. Gao, get me Men Nan. I have an emergency. He is still hospitalized. What do you want from him? It's a life and death situation. He was born at a mental hospital, and the hidden third persona is the real Men Nan, Chin-gu said urgently. While Dr. Gao was confused by what he had said, from Chin-ji's hurried tone, he knew the gravity of the situation. I'll drive to the hospital now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't hang up, tell me if you need anything. I might not survive 20 minutes. Chen Ji's back was sore, and the few sick rooms next to him had started to make weird noises. Dr. Gao, you have to help me invoke the youngest persona inside Men Nan. The youngest persona? Men Nan's third person is very well secluded and rarely appears. I cannot promise that I'll be able to do anything, you'd better be mentally prepared for a failure. There was the sound of a door opening from Dr. Gao's side. He was rushing out of his home. Only the youngest persona will have the answer to what I need to know. Dr. Gao, no matter what, you have to wake him up. The slamming of the door came from behind him, and through the phone, Dr. Gao could hear it clearly. I'll try my best. He knew Chenggu through Gao Rushui. Initially, he had treated Chenggu as someone who liked psychology, but when Chenggu volunteered to cure Wang Xian and Men Nan, his impression of the young man improved greatly, and at the same time, he gained many new questions about the man. Especially that night, he saw something questionable at Hai Ming Apartments, but he had not told anyone. He kept it inside his heart, attempting to find the answer himself. The phone stayed connected, and as Dr. Gao drove toward the hospital Men Nan was at, Chenggu tried to hold the door behind him shut. About 3 minutes later, the door slamming did not end, and to make matters worse, the sound of gears unlocking came from room 8, which was not far away from Chenggu. The room had a reinforced door, and it slowly opened to a slit. A face that was uneven on both sides looked out. He extended his neck and came out of the room wearing a doctor's garb. The man was hiding inside the sick room. Chenggu had tried opening the door earlier, but he had failed. Now that he thought about it, it was probably the twisted face who did something to the door. The doctor's skullcracker's hammer leaned against room 3's door, and he only had access to the cleaver. Chenggu looked at the twisted face and was considering pushing him into the door as well. I wonder what will happen to living person if trapped behind the door. If he dares to attack me, he'll be the perfect candidate to experiment on. The more dangerous it was, the calmer Chenggu became. He held the cleaver and adjusted the position of the hammer. He formed a barricade using the hammer so that even if he left the door would not be opened instantly. After midnight, there were some chances to the man's twisted face. His expression was more insane, and he slowly strode toward Chenggu empty-handed. Something's not right. Chenggu noticed the problem instantly. When the man was at the second sick hall, he had run without a second thought even though he had the axe, but after entering the third sick hall, he dared approach Chenggu, who had both a cleaver and a hammer, empty-handed. The white cat hissed dangerously. When Chenggu was fighting with the nurse, it had jumped down from Chen Ji's shoulder, and now it was gnashing its teeth at the twisted face. Facing the cat and the man, the twisted face's expression was completely different from before. His face that seemed to have undergone surgery revealed an ugly smile. He walked slower and slower with each step like there was something heavy on his shoulders, and every step was a painful ordeal for the man. His pose is similar to Wang Xinglong's. With the cleaver before his chest, the thing that Chenggu did not wish to see the most appeared. The twisted face's lips cracked open even more, and a second head appeared behind his shoulders. It was just a normal head, but like a person standing up, a thin monster that was about 2.5 meters long extended out from the twisted face's back. The monster's lower body was connected to the twisted face's back, and the monster touched the ceiling easily. It then curved forward, like a human-headed cobra heading toward Chenggu. What is this? Even though he was prepared, when Chenggu saw the monster, he was still quite shocked. The monster was thin and long, wearing a large white cloth that was sewn together. Through the open patches, Chenggu could see several human faces that were silent and drawn. At the beginning, the monster was probably not that tall, but after jumping onto people's shoulders and consuming them, it finally grew to this height. Chenggu realized something. Wang Xinglong had once used a painting to describe his relationship with a monster. In the painting, he had been at the bottom, and the monster was stepping on his shoulders. The twisted face and the monster before Chenggu shared a different relationship. The monster came directly out of the man's back. Is the twisted face the monster itself, or have they achieved some kind of mutually beneficial relationship? There was no time to think because even though the twisted face stopped at 2 meters away from Chingu, the long monster on his back had already reached the top of Chinji's skull. The monster's face was extremely common. It was the kind that would be forgotten easily, but who would have thought that such a common face hid a gruesome monster? Let's play a game. If you win, I'll let you go, but if you lose, you'll give me your body. The monster in the twisted face's lips moved at the same time, and the voice appeared in Chinji's mind. The game's name is called Who Speaks First. This was a game that the player was destined to lose because there was no time limit. Wang Xinglong was the perfect example. After agreeing to the game, the monster would climb onto the player's back and start the torment. If the player lost their conviction and spoke, the monster would win, but even if they did not, the monster would continue to squat on their shoulders, and the game would never end. The human faces that Chingu saw through the patches were probably the monster's victims. If you want to play a game, sure, but you'll need to edit the rules, Chingu said in a calm tone. Dr. Gao was rushing to the hospital, so he was buying time for himself. The monster stopped above Chinji's head. It was about half a meter away, and it took in a slight breath because it had not experienced this situation before. After a moment's pause, it turned to look at the twisted face, as if asking for his opinion. Shouldn't a normal person be screaming by now? The smile froze on the twisted face. He assumed that Chingu was toying with them, so he pointed his finger at Chinji's head. The monster understood his meaning. It leaned downward, and a pair of shriveled hands reached out for Chinji's face, its body still extending. Chingu saw the monster approaching, but he did not lose his cool. If anything, his mind was working clearer than before. This is the monster's weakness. When he tried to attack me, it only moved its upper body, and its lower body was still stuck to the twisted face. This means that it probably cannot move its lower body easily. No wonder it wants to play this game with people. If it could just jump on people's shoulders to take over their body, it wouldn't need to draw people in with the pretext of playing a game. Chingu took a step back, but his eyes were glowing. When it moves from one body to the next, that is probably when it is the weakest. Chingu kept evading, but he was eventually cornered by the monster. Wait. I agree to play the game with you. Facing certain death, Chingu surrendered. He pocketed his phone. Looking at the monster, he said, "We'll do it your way." The change in Chinji's attitude made the twisted face suspicious, but the monster was just excited. Before starting the game, you need to drop the cleaver. This was the first time Chingu had heard the man speak. He had a special voice, like his vocal cords had been operated on before, and it sounded sharp and shrill. If I win the game, you need to guarantee that I can leave this place safely. Chinji's eyes were filled with distrust. Seeing this, the twisted face felt more confident. Move away from the door, drop the knife, and after you win the game, I will tell you the exit. The game was a losing battle. If Chingu really agreed to it, his future would be a life of torture inside a dark mental hospital. Fine, I agree. What shall I do next? Chingu tossed the cleaver aside, but he made sure that the handle was facing him. He shoved both his hands into his pockets. Just stand where you are. The twisted face walked forward until he was 2 meters away from Chingu. From this moment on, no matter what you see or hear, you cannot make a sound or else you lose. He stared at Chingu while the monster on his back continued to extend until the very common face was hanging upside down before Chingu. Still not speaking. Then how about something more exciting? Chingu sat down and bent over. The monster completely extricated itself from his back. The monster as 3 meters tall. Its legs were less than 1 meter long, and his limbs were the size of normal people. However, its body was long, like it was attached together from the bodies of many different people. What in the world is this? The monster was so tall that it had a hard time maintaining its balance as it wiggled its way toward Chin-gu. There were only 2 meters between them. The monster's upper body hung above Chin-gu while its lower body slowly climbed toward him. As if afraid that Chin-gu might regret his decision, its spindly hands gripped Chin-ji's shoulders to prevent him from running. Chin-gu was rather nervous as the creature walked toward him. He repeated the plan in his mind multiple times as he kept his eyes on the monster's legs. When the legs were next to the cleaver, Chin-ji's hand inside his pocket suddenly pulled out. There was something he had that would definitely cause damage on the monster. The sharp tip of the pen stuck into the monster's eye. The force caused the pen that was taped together to shatter immediately. The pen was stuck inside the monster's eye socket, and its body wiggled like a snake. Obviously, it was damaged. In Hai Ming Apartments, Chin-gu had accidentally thrown Xiao Xiao at the mirror monster, and the doll had taken a bite out of the monster's body. It was then that Chin-gu realized other ghosts were the most effective method to harm ghosts. Using the pen spirit's ballpoint pen was part of his plan. When the monster was screaming from pain, Chin-gu yanked out the pen and rushed forward. He acted very fast. When the twisted face realized what was happening, Chin-gu already held the cleaver in his hand. When he tossed the knife, he had already planned everything. He knew that even if he placed the handle toward himself, the twisted face would not have noticed it considering how dark the corridor was. Feeling the weight of the cleaver in his hands, Chin-gu aimed it at the monster's weakness, its legs. He had suffered a lot that night, and that cut contained all the negative emotions that Chin-gu wanted to vent. With every cut, the monster's body dwindled. The effect of the cleaver is still too weak to completely demolish this monster. When it recovers, the situation will still be unfavorable for me. Chin-gu soon calmed down from his battle rage. The cleaver cannot hurt the monster, but it can definitely incapacitate the person who it relies on. With the cleaver in his hands, Chin-gu whipped his head around to glare at the twisted face. What is the meaning of this? The twisted face broke out in cold sweat. For some reason, he felt like history was about to repeat itself. You're dead meat. Chin-gu ran at him with the cleaver raised. The twisted face turned around and dashed toward the stairs. The twisted face ran for his life, and Chin-gu chased after him with the cleaver glinting dangerously in the dark. Behind them, the monster who was poked blind slithered like a snake on the floor as it tried to catch up to its prey. The 3 formed a curious sort of balance as they ran from the 1st floor to the 4th. After entering the 4th floor corridor, Chin-gu slowed down. He realized that the twisted face seemed to be purposely leading him this way. When they ran up the other floor, the twisted face did not even hesitate. He just shot up the stairs to the 4th floor. He wants to escape to the other sick halls. Impossible, he can only control the monster when he is inside the 3rd sick hall. Chin-gu knew very well how unique the 3rd sick hall was for these mental patients. They would not leave this place willingly for various reasons. Just as the twisted face was about to leave the 3rd sick hall, he finally stopped. He screamed loudly until his face twisted even more. Hearing the man's screams, 2 other men climbed out of the rooms from the sides. They were both injured, and they were Su Tong and the patient with the phantom limb syndrome. If it was just the 3 of them, Chin-gu would not have been so afraid, but he could see the monsters slowly extending out from the 2 other men's backs. All the patients at 3rd sick hall are possessed by monsters. Their relationship should be more peaceful compared to Zhangpeng and the mirror monster. This is not a good sign for me. There were 9 patients at 3rd sick hall, and after taking out Wang Xinglong, Chin-gu might need to face 8 similar monsters that night. There might even be monsters that were scarier than these. The thin bodies snuck out from the patients' backs, and Chin-gu was surrounded by the 3 monsters. Don't be afraid, you'll soon be one of us. Twisted Face had the 2 patients block Chin-ji's way as he moved to lock the steel door that connected the 2nd and 3rd sick hall. Standing there, Chin-gu felt that all hope was lost. The 3 monsters had blocked all the exits, and they slowly inched closer to him. Chingu doubted that they would even give him the chance to commit suicide. A 3-star scenario is still too tough for me. Chingu leaned against the wall and took out a candy with a crying face from his pocket. This is my last trump card. After using this, no matter what, I'll need to leave this place. Chingu popped the candy into his mouth, and instantly, he could feel endless resentment and coldness spread through his body. Long black hairs knocked into the walls like waves. An intensely wicked presence was awakening. Zhanya walked out of Qinji's shadow in red. The girl's face was even more ethereal, heightened by the red in her outfit. Her black hair fluttered in the wind. Zhanya stood before Chingu, with less than 30 centimeters between their faces. The chill seeped through his skin, and Qinji's lips turned purple from the cold. The man who was not afraid of anything felt fear curl around his heart. Instinctually, he wanted to lean backwards, but he found himself unable to move. The crying candle seemed to have melted into a flowing icy river, freezing every blood vessel in his body. There was a spirit crying for help surging through his body. The negative energy gathered around his heart like a pair of hands had clamped over it. The candy was hard to swallow, and Chingu felt like he was going to faint from a lack of air. Zhanya moved toward him slowly, radiating icy presence. She finally stopped before Chingu. That face without temperature, its beauty was enough to stop the breath in Qinji's throat. His throat could not make any sound, and the candy had melted. Chingu could feel a spirit surging within his body. Looking at Zhanya, who was just 6 centimeters away from him, his calves started to quiver involuntarily. This is not what I had in mind. Someone stop her. Perhaps the title of Spectre's favorite did kick in because the monster that was blinded by Pen's spirit crawled toward him at full speed. The thin body slithered like a giant snake. Its bony hands gripped Qinji's shoulders, and its lower body arced like it was preparing to jump on Qinji's shoulder. The pain from his shoulders woke Chingu up from his fear-induced trance. He turned around to look at the monster and gave him an appreciative look. Appreciation? This seemed to have offended the monster, and the head that hung high went mad. It had no intention of fighting Zhanya and chose a spot on Qinji's neck to bite. The twisted human head opened its jaw but stopped when it was half a meter away from Chingu. It was not that it wanted to stop, but it was forced to. In the dark, strings of bloody hair bound its body. The monster screamed and glared resentfully at Zhanya. It did not attack Zhanya earlier, but that did not mean that it was afraid of Zhanya. The 3 monsters communicated with each other, and they switched their target to Zhanya. Chingu did not know what Zhanya was about to do, but he saw the girl's face drop. The black hair drilled into the monster's body. Her slender arms gripped the monster's head and slammed it heavily against the wall. The monster wailed for the second time. The first time was when Chingu used the Pen spirit to poke into its eye. This is so cruel. When Zhanya started battling the monster, the chilliness on Chingu decreased enough that he could move. He quickly moved backwards. The screaming of the spirit in his body weakened as the candy continued to dissolve. His eyes felt surrounded by coldness and his power of sight increased once more. He could see clearer in the dark. The 3 monsters tussled with Zhanya. Her red outfit blazed in the dark, signaling her burning anger and resentment. It appeared like she was going to tear the monsters apart and consume them. 10 minutes later, it was a slaughter inside the corridor. The monsters were increasingly wounded. When they were joined to humans, these thin monsters were the strongest, but when they were detached from their hosts, their power greatly weakened. Even though they had the advantage of numbers, they could not do anything to Zhanya. The difference in power is so huge. The thin monster was the scariest ghost Chingu had ever met. Initially, he had thought this monster would be as powerful as Zhanya, but it looked like he had underestimated Zhanya. She is definitely unique to be able to have a personal page inside the black phone. Chingu gripped the cleaver, he did not dare let his guard down. At most, Western Zhejiang Private Academy was a 3-star scenario, but Chingu believed it was only a 2-star scenario. As the ghost from Western Zhejiang Private Academy, Zhang Yi could deal with the monsters from the 3-star third sick hall easily. This could only mean one thing. There should be something scarier than the thin monster hiding inside the third sick hall. There has to be a reason why the black phone evaluates the third sick hall as a 3-star scenario. There should also be a red specter inside the hospital and perhaps even more than one. The more Chingu thought about it, the more confused he became. The door had been left open for so many years already, so theoretically speaking, the whole hospital should have been a monster's den by now. Did all the ghosts leave, or did something happen to them after they left the world behind the door? Chingu looked around, and he realized the blood vessels that he saw on the first-floor corridor had appeared on the 4th floor as well, and they were moving silently toward Zhanya. This is bad. Chingu had regained full control of his body. The candy given by Zhanya was made from a human soul, and the effect of the candy froze his body. When the candy fully melted, the candy was absorbed by the yin-yang vision. Zhanya did not mean to use this method to harm Chingu. There is something else hiding at the third sick hall. Maybe the real monster is the hall itself. Chingu ran forward, but he only took several steps before Dr. Gao's voice came from the phone in his pocket. Chingu. I found Men Nan. The call had not been disconnected, so Dr. Gao knew things were urgent from what he heard. Okay, give him the phone. Chingu stopped moving. Men Nan was the key to this whole issue, he was the one who had seen the door and closed it before. This is Men Nan, thank you for helping me last time. Skip the formalities. I know there's a child persona hiding inside your mind, you should know how to wake him up. Chen Ji's situation was critical. The extremely scary thing inside the third sick hall was awakening due to Zhanya's appearance. You must be mistaken. What is this different persona you're talking about? He is inside you. Chingu raised his voice. You were raised inside a mental hospital. I don't know how that influenced your growth, perhaps you are trying to avoid it, but some things cannot be avoided even if you pretend that they can. What are you talking about? Men Nan did not sound like he was lying. Perhaps I did grow up at a mental hospital, but who can remember things when they were a baby? A baby's synapses grow rapidly, and it might cause the instability in recorded memory. Therefore, many people cannot remember things when they were a baby, Dr. Gao explained from an objective perspective. But this doesn't mean that they've forgotten all about it. They were hidden deep inside one's mind. By evoking these memories, perhaps that childhood persona can be awakened. Evoking the memory. Chingu rummaged through his pocket and took out the picture he had found in the director's office. He snapped a picture of it and sent it to Dr. Gao. Men Nan, take a good look at this picture, this is the sick room your mother once stayed in. It is room 3 in the third sick hall. Focus on the door that sat between yourself and your mother. Door. Men Nan's voice had an audible change. He had been reminded of something. The picture that Chingu had sent, Men Nan also possessed, but his picture was placed at the bottom of a drawer under several books. When Chingu saw the picture at Hai Ming Apartments, he had been confused. This was the only picture Men Nan had of his mother, so he could not understand why he did not display it inside a photo frame. Instead, Men Nan hid it in a secluded corner like a memory that he refused to face. He did not want to throw it away but refused to face it. It was the conflict inside his heart. Where did you get this picture? Men Nan's voice croaked, and his tone slowed down. Chingu brought the thing that he was trying to hide up to the surface, so he could not run away anymore. I found the picture at the mental hospital. I've gone inside the room your mother stayed in. Leave that place immediately. Men Nan screamed before Chingu finished. Leave. Looks like you have remembered something. There was another period of silence on the phone. Several seconds later, Men Nan said, I don't know why I said that, but my instincts told me that place is very dangerous. The mental hospital is locked, and I cannot leave. If it was not urgent, I wouldn't have called to disturb you. Holding the cleaver, Chen-gu saw the blood vessels were still inching toward Zhangya. This has gone beyond me and you. Those madmen who refused treatment have returned to this place with their twisted ideologies. They have detained living humans and experimented with axes and saws. Can you imagine what else they might have done? There are victims in the hospital. Men Nan's voice was filled with uncertainty. He seemed to be doubting himself, like he wanted to say something but did not have the courage to. I can confirm one thing: there is more than one victim. I've found plenty of evidence here that suggests there are multiple victims. Chen-gu did not know what Men Nan was hesitating about. I'm also in a dangerous situation. Monsters and patients are chasing me with axes. I cannot communicate with them. After a long time, Men Nan spoke. How do you expect me to help you? Awaken the other persona inside you. He's the one I'm looking for. The stench in the air intensified like a monster opening its maw. Can you tell me why? Men Nan's voice was soft, and it was filled with complicated emotions. Chen-gu did not have the time to play games with Men Nan, so he answered truthfully, I want to close the door of the third room at the third sick hall. Your childhood persona knows the way to close it. Awaken him. I know what happened to you when you were young. I understand and relate to your pain, but you cannot run away from it forever. Close the door. Men Nan seemed to be talking to himself. I'm sorry, but I'm afraid I can't help you. Chen-gu did not expect the brutal rejection from Men Nan. Why? Because he is not with me. Men Nan took a deep breath. He locked himself up behind the door. Your childhood persona is on the other side of the door. Chen-ji's brows were furrowed deeply. Yes. To be honest, he is the real main persona. My memory started only after 4 years old. Men Nan revealed this shocking information. The main persona was born at the mental hospital and saw the twisted as normal. His world is different from normal. Before 4 years old, he tried his best to fix his perspective, and his only pillar of support was his mother, but when he was 4, his mother was murdered, and the persona, who saw everything, decided to give up on the normal world. Perhaps the normal world had never shown him any kindness, so he believed that the world that we reside in is the truly twisted one. He closed himself up in his psyche, and then I appeared. He did not communicate with me until the day the director from the mental hospital and a Dr. Chen came to find me. They pleaded for my help to close this door. At the time, I was so small, and without knowing anything, they brought me back to the mental hospital where the main persona once spent his childhood. They asked me many questions, questions that now I cannot answer. That night, they arranged for me to sleep inside room 3, and I don't know what happened next. There were probably sleeping pills in the water because I slumbered so deeply, and it was probably then that they summoned the main persona. When I woke up, it was already midnight. I opened my eyes blurrily and saw myself lying in bed, but everything around me was blood red. However, the strangest thing was that the main persona was standing beside me. He told me to keep this a secret from everyone and pointed at the clock on the outside corridor. He told me to keep myself awake no matter how tired I was. Then he sent me out of the room. He stayed behind the door and closed it. After that, he stopped appearing, but there are sometimes memories that don't belong to me that appear in my consciousness. I plan to carry these secrets with me to my grave because, even now, I'm unsure if these are just hallucinations. My situation is very similar to schizophrenia, but everything seems so real. I grew up in a state of constant self-doubt, and it is the main reason I chose to study psychology. There was great pain in Men Nan's voice, and Chen-gu, as an outsider, understood his pain. To pretend to be a normal person and live a normal life was something of a challenge to the young man. This explains why he was unable to resist the mirror ghost. Chen-gu held the phone, and his heart was quivering with anxiety. Men Nan should be telling the truth. When I detected the third persona inside his psyche, it did appear like shattered memories because the occurrences were very episodic and randomized. Dr. Gao took the phone from Men Nan. He did not understand the conversation between Men Nan and Chingu, so he could not be much help. Yes, he should be telling the truth. The only person who could close the door had spent the last decade or so inside the door, and the door had been closed for that long. It was not until the hospital closed 5 years ago that the door opened again. Could the real Men Nan inside the door have gotten into some accident? Chingu wanted to retreat. This building was too wicked. Even with Zhanya, he did not feel that safe. It's safer to retreat. He turned to look at the corridor. The draft fluttered Zhanya's red outfit. The black hair that melted into the night poked through the monsters' bodies repeatedly. Of the 3 monsters, 2 were already torn apart. Black snow seemed to be falling in the corridor. Zhanya stood in the midst of it as her black hair absorbed the energy from the torn-apart thin monsters, and the red on her clothes burned even brighter. She has gotten even stronger. Chen Ji's eyes twitched. Zhanya's affection level toward him was increasing at lightning speed. What if they broke through a certain level and Zhanya accidentally killed him? This girl, who looked cute and quiet, had a penchant for torturing her victims. If there was a seat open for the worst villain in this story, she would be a good candidate. We'd better leave the third sick hall soon. Chingu walked toward Zhanya to try to get her to leave. Of the 3 monsters, only the one who was blinded remained. It was heavily wounded, and the faces on its body were screaming for help. Even Chingu could not help but feel sorry for the helpless creature. Zhanya, it has received enough punishment. Stop torturing it, and just end its life. We're in a hurry, and I don't plan to stay at this place for long. Blood streamed out like tears from the monster's only functional eye. It tried its best to struggle from the bind of the black hairs. The faces on its body started to scream shrilly. It's calling for help. Just leave it be then, let's go. Chingu walked a few steps and realized that Zhanya was still standing where she was, her black hair slowly curling around the monster's feet. At the other end of the corridor, endless pulsing blood vessels seemed to reach into the monster's body like they were trying to rescue it. The stench in the air turned heavier. While Zhanya was fighting with the blood vessels, the real monster at Third Sick Hall was awakening. More blood vessels poked out from the walls and ceiling. Part of them wrapped around the monster's upper body while the rest crept toward Zhanya. What is the thing that is controlling these blood streaks? Chingu tried to go and help Zhanya, but before he got near, the thin monster was torn into 2. Most of the body parts were wrapped up by the blood vessels and carried downstairs. Zhanya only got a small part of it. This was the first time Zhanya had lost, but from how Chingu saw it, they were lucky they kept their lives. He was about to advise Zhanya to leave, but before he could say anything, he saw the black hair come out of Zhanya's back like waves, and that flash of red rushed down the stairs. The blood vessels along the way were torn apart, and Zhanya soon disappeared down the 4th-floor corridor. A cold draft blew into Chen Ji's open mouth, and he said after 2 seconds, she still wants to give chase. Chingu looked at the dark corridor, and various scary images crowded his mind. His rationality told him it was time to leave, things had gone beyond his expectations. Retreat was the wise solution. He wanted to leave, but Zhanya had rushed forward alone. In fact, she might be tricked into enter the blood door. It was a dangerous world on the other side of the door, and Zhanya might be outnumbered. The more he thought about it, the more scared he became. Chingu slashed the cleaver on the wall, yelling, "What am I doing?" Then, he gritted his teeth and rushed into the darkness. Sitting beside a bloated mattress, the white cat's eyes were filled with confusion. This man said one thing but did another, his body even ran faster than earlier. Chingu ran from 4th floor to 2nd floor, but he still did not see Zhanya. More blood spots appeared on the walls, and it looked scary. All the blood streaks along the third and fourth floor were taken care of, but only some are destroyed on this floor, so Zhangya probably stopped here. Chengu did not see Zhangya on the second floor, and Chengu went down to the first floor. The blood-red corridor was empty. Chengu stepped into it cautiously. Don't tell me Zhangya has already entered the blood door. Wait outside or walk in to look for her. There was no sound from the other side of the door, and Chengu hesitated. He would not necessarily be able to handle the dangers that were inside the door, but if something happened to Zhangya inside the door, Chengu would not be able to escape even if he stayed outside the door. Holding the doorknob, Chen Ji's fingers were twitching. He took a deep breath and removed the almost shattered ballpoint pen from his pocket. It's already a new day, I want to use my fortune-telling chance. Chengu straightened the pen above the brown mattress. Pen spirit, is there a way for me to save myself and Zhangya? Without any hesitation, Pen spirit wrote down 3 words on the mattress: enter the door. Isn't that a bit too fast? Don't you need to think about it? Chengu pocketed the pen. He looked at the door and made his decision. He took out his phone. There was only a small amount of battery left. He called Men Nan to ask, didn't you say some mysterious memories would appear inside your mind? Are there any blood-red scenarios among those memories? There are. Try to focus on those memories, and tell me, is there anything I should pay attention to regarding these blood-red scenarios? Chengu could not just leave Zhangya behind. He was in too deep, and he would need Zhangya's help in the future. He could not lose her. The extra memories are rarely related to blood red, and even when they are, they seem to happen inside a similar scenario. Men Nan thought about it. It is a fully enclosed room, there are no windows and only one door. The space is small and has a wooden bed. There are binders attached to the bed, and there are machines next to it. It looks like an electroshock therapy room. Electroshock therapy. Yes, in the memory, various monsters entered the room. They twisted the binders around the bed, and then they conversed with each other as if saying, don't wake it up. Thinking about these things seemed to put extra pressure on Men Nan's head. His tone sounded pained. I couldn't see the monsters closely, but I do know one of them seems to have a broken face, and the monster mentioned a name. I think it was Wu Fei. The broken face and Wu Fei were both patients at the 3rd sick hall. They respectively took up residence in room 10 and room 9. They were the most dangerous presences at this hospital. Is there anything else? Chengu stood at the door. There's something, but I'm not sure whether it will be useful or not. 10 years ago, I remember the main persona telling me that if I needed to find him one day, after entering the blood-red door, I should not speak. Okay, thank you. Chengu zipped his mouth shut, placed the phone in his pocket, grabbed the hammer and cleaver, and stepped into the door. Breathing became difficult, like he had walked into a thick fog. He felt moisture on his skin, and everything had a sheen of red to it. This is the world behind the door. Chengu remembered Men Nan's advice. He kept his mouth shut, and with the cleaver and hammer in his hands, he looked around. The walls, ceiling, and decorations in room 3 were identical to the one in the real world. He turned around, and what he saw made his heart race. The door of room 3 was open, but the scene outside the corridor did not reflect what it was in the real world. The difference was drastic. It was a corridor without any trash, clean and well kept. The mattresses and dolls that littered the floor were nowhere to be seen, and it felt like there were cleaners who cleaned the place every day. Chengu nudged toward the door carefully. He reached his arm out, and his arm did not disappear. The door appeared to only work one way. Since he had been warned to not speak, Chengu could not call Zhangya. Bracing himself, he walked out of room 3, and as he stepped out, he ran into something on the corridor. It was not a monster as he expected, not a zombie or a dead body, but a doll made from bedsheets and pillows. And there was more than one. They stood along the corridor like scarecrows. Their drawn expressions had a blank smile, and Chen-gu could not tell whether they were happy or sad. Why are there such things in the world beyond the door? Chen-gu assumed that the dolls buried inside the mattresses were just a silly prank, but after seeing this, his opinion changed. The nurse would feed the patients their medicine every night. She even had a special notebook to record each patient's name and medical history. Most crucially, all these patients had died in the real world, so these dolls probably carried their lingering spirit. Lingering spirits were a lot weaker than baleful specters, but when the number of lingering spirits was at least 10 times the baleful specters, the baleful specter might not win. When Chen-gu studied the doll, one of them seemed to sense him. Its head that was lowered suddenly raised, and its body turned. Its face that looked like it was drawn on by the hand of a child looked at Chen-gu, and Chen-gu started to sweat. The doll's body slowly moved, and Chen-gu raised the cleaver. The distance between the two closed, but the doll did not seem to pay Chen-gu any attention. With its wiggling gait, it walked to the other end of the corridor. It did not seem to have any purpose. It walked down the corridor aimlessly and stopped to lean against the wall when it was tired. It reminded Chen-gu of a mannequin puppet. Chen-gu had met many lingering spirit. The reason for their formation was a deep compulsion that they could not let go of. It caused them to remain in the real world. However, the lingering spirit inside the doll was completely different. It seemed to have lost its memory, or it had completely silenced its heart. Since the doll did not attack Chen-gu, there was no reason for him to provoke them. He slid silently out of room 3 and inspected the walls on the corridor. The wall had obvious scratch marks on it, they had probably been caused by Zhangya. Chen-gu followed the marks up to the second floor, and when he exited the stairwell, Chen-gu almost screamed from shock. Various dolls teetered on the second floor corridor. They wandered about aimlessly and paid no heed to their surroundings. There was a great number of them. Some of them were fallen on the floor with black scratch marks on them, a sign that Zhangya had passed through this way. Walking amid the tipsy dolls, Chen-gu had this weird sensation that perhaps he was the crazy one. If one was surrounded by mad people, would the normal one think he was the crazy one? The further he walked, the harder it was for Chen-gu to breathe. There was a heaviness on his body like he was being tossed into the ocean and sinking. Thankfully, no one attacked him. Chen-gu successfully reached the end of the second floor corridor, and the scratch marks ended there. At the end of the corridor was a special room. Chen-gu had not had the time to examine it in real life before he was chased by the nurse to the first floor. This room that he had missed was the electroshock therapy room. After pushing it open, the scene that he saw surprised him. It was different from what he had expected. There was only one bed in the room, and a boy about 5 years old was tied to it. Chen-gu walked to the bed, and after comparing the picture, he was sure this was the young man Nan. A question surfaced in Chen-ji's mind. Why is he here? Based on the memory left in Men Nan's mind, Chen-gu had a bold speculation. An accident did happen to Men Nan's main persona inside the door, and it was because the door had lost its guardian that it started to go out of control. The scratch marks disappeared here, so this proved that she had been here before, but there was no sign of a struggle inside the room. Chen-gu had no idea where Zhangya had disappeared to, but since he had found Men Nan's main persona, he decided to rescue him first. Only by waking up the boy would he gain a new understanding of the world behind the door and perhaps a new helper. That was the ideal situation, but what would really happen, no one knew. Chen-gu could only hedge a bet on it going well. The cleaver slit open the binders easily, and Chen-gu lightly nudged Men Nan's body. It was unknown whether the boy was caught in a deep sleep or unconscious. No matter how hard Chen-gu shook him, his eyes remained closed. He could not speak inside this blood world, so Chen-gu tried other methods to wake the boy up. He did not know what happened to the boy, and his brain tried to fill in the blanks. The culprit did not kill the boy but detained him inside the electroshock therapy room. This meant that the boy was still useful to the culprit, so they would not see any harm come to the boy. A crazy thought flashed across Chen-ji's mind. Chingu silently raised the cleaver. He moved the blade up and down several times. He narrowed his eyes at the space close to the boy's neck and waved the cleaver downwards. The blade did not make contact with the bed. When it was about 2 centimeters away, a hairy hand appeared to block Chingu's cleaver. Chingu had been paying full attention, but he still did not know where the arm came from. Chingu pulled the cleaver back and put some distance between them. Chingu saw the monster in its full form. It had no body, it was only a broken arm. The arm seemed to be protecting the boy. To try out this theory, Chingu unleashed another attack at the boy. His every slash was blocked by the arm, and as this repeated itself, the arm started to crack. Just as Chingu thought the arm was about to disappear, many other broken arms appeared from underneath the bed. The tussle between the two parties grew louder, and about 10 seconds later, there was a slight twitch on the sleeping boy's face. The boy is waking up. Chingu had no idea how many broken arms were hiding under the bed, and there might be monsters outside the door as well. Chingu did not think it was wise to stay inside the room for too long. Risking the danger of being hurt by the arms, Chingu rushed into the fray and held the boy in the bed in his arms. He placed the blade on the boy's neck as he retreated to the wall, his eyes scanning the room. He did not know why these arms were stopping him from harming Men Nan. If they care about Men Nan's safety, why would they strap him to the bed? When he entered the door, the trial mission had gone out of control. Chingu did not know what would happen next, this was something he had not faced before. Tightening the grip on the cleaver, the only thing he could do then was wake Men Nan up. This boy was his only hope of surviving this ordeal. When the blade touched the boy's skin, the broken arms stopped attacking. Like being controlled, all of them bounced to the door to knock on it. The incessant knocking unsettled Chingu. He remembered Men Nan's order, so he had not said a word since entering the door. Even when he moved, he kept his footsteps as light as possible. The knocking was loud, and it reverberated down the corridor, shattering the peace that Chingu had tried so hard to maintain. A bad feeling appeared in Chingu's heart. He started to panic, but before he could do anything, a large senior appeared at the door of the electroshock therapy room. The old man was 1.8 meters tall, had a head full of white hair, and was wearing a doctor's coat. However, his coat was drenched with blood, it had turned fully red. Looking at the old man, 2 words flashed across Chingu's mind: Red Spectre. The warning from Men Nan was probably to avoid this thing, but since the monster had already appeared, there was no reason for Chingu to be cautious anymore. This is surprising. I didn't think that there would be others who could enter the door other than myself. The senior was kind and gentle. He looked very approachable, if one could overlook the blood-soaked coat. This is not a place where you should be. Put the boy down and quickly leave. Chingu did not move. The boy was his only leverage, so he could not let that go so easily. The blade was pressed on the boy's neck. He stared at the senior at the door, and the longer he stared, the more frightened he felt. The senior's hands were slightly twisted, like they had been smashed by something heavy. The kind face also felt weird, it looked very death-like, as if it was a dead person's makeup. This man has been dead for a long time already. This was the conclusion Chingu came up with using his talent in mortician's makeup. Seeing how Chingu did not say anything, the senior took the first step into the room with an unchanged expression. Sensing his movement, Chingu pressed on the blade. The boy's eyes twitched like he could feel the pain. It felt like he was waking up. Don't hurt the boy. The senior stopped and said something curious. If something happens to the boy, you'll never be able to return. He snapped his fingers, and the broken arms all retreated under the bed. Chingu saw this and took a step away from the bed. You're so tense. Relax a bit. The senior's voice sounded convincing. Similar to Dr. Gao, he had the ability to make the other person relax and put their guard down during normal conversation. It was unclear whether this senior relied on psychological tactics or something else completely. In this place, the only one who can communicate with you is me, and only I can help you. Chin-gu did not reply. He raised the hammer with one hand and pointed at the door. You want to leave? The senior shook his head. You can leave at any time, but the boy cannot. He has to stay inside this room. The electroshock therapy room was the room at the hospital with the best soundproofing system. It was completely isolated. No one would have any idea what happened within. Being trapped by a red specter unsettled Chin-gu. He started to panic, and his arm flexed. The blade pressed down another few centimeters. The senior's face twitched, but he recovered quickly. I'm not threatening you. Just give me a chance to explain myself, then you can make your decision. You might not believe this, but we are living in this boy's nightmare. If something happens to him, or if he wakes up, we will forever be trapped here. Nightmare? This was the first time Chin-gu had spoken since he stepped into the door. He examined the senior's reaction closely, and after realizing that there was nothing wrong with his body, he relaxed slightly. Yes, the boy grew up in a mental hospital, and due to multiple reasons, he has developed a sickly worldview. What the senior said next touched Chin-gu. You must have seen the dolls made from pillows and bed sheets wandering the halls already. In the boy's eyes, they represented the patients who received treatment in the hospital. Dulled by the effect of medication, they slowly turned into lifeless dolls. They lost interest in everything and spent their days in a waking dream. This is all his imagination. Chin-gu looked at the bed. Then how do you explain the broken arms? They don't exist in real life. The arms hiding under the bed are the manifestation of the boy's fears. When he was very young, a doctor purposely scared him, saying there was a hairy arm hiding under every child's bed, and if the child was naughty, the arm would come out at midnight to pull on the child's ankle and drag them into the darkness under the bed. Because of this story, the broken arms became a symbol of fear in the boy's nightmare, the senior explained. In this nightmare, there is also a thin monster that likes to stand on people's shoulders. They are a manifestation of desire. Their original size is similar to a normal man, but as they jump onto the shoulders of different individuals, they squeeze their host dry, and their body continues to grow. Human desire is bottomless, and when it grows beyond its limit, it turns harmful and ugly. There are many more similar examples. Everything in this world is a reflection of the boy's subconscious. Chin-gu could not tell whether the senior was lying or not. From his perspective, even this old man was not right in the head. I know it is hard to believe, but it is the truth. A human brain has 150 billion synapses, and 95% of them were untapped. If we compare a human brain to an iceberg, the large part that remains submerged is our subconscious. The adult brain is mature, but it is different for a baby. When a child is between 1 and 3, their brain is at its most active. It is also the time when the subconscious starts to form. If during this period, the child's mindset is continuously challenged and tested, then the subconscious will become highly active even to the point of supplementing the actual conscious mind. To be honest, Chin-gu did not really understand what the old man was saying, but he had a feeling that the senior was lying to him. He was trying to hide something. To conclude what the senior had said, the world behind the door was just a nightmare formed by Men Nan's main persona. When the boy woke up, the door connecting the real world and the dream would close, and they would be trapped in the dream forever. Chin-gu would have believed the old man if not for the door that also appeared at the haunted house. The appearance of the door at two different places was not something that can be explained by a boy's nightmare. Chin-gu did not reveal that fact. He looked at the senior and asked another question. You said that this is the boy's nightmare and everything here is a reflection of the boy's subconscious. Then can you tell me, what role do you play in this nightmare? Or rather, what does you being in his nightmare represent? The expression froze on the old man's face, but he did not evade the question. Similar to you, I came from outside the nightmare. We are outsiders, so even in the nightmare, we are playing ourselves. Playing ourselves? Chin-gu came from the outside world, and there was no visible change to his body. The old man did not have a trace of liveliness to him, and Chin-gu could not move his focus away from the blindingly red coat. A thought flashed across Chin-ji's mind. Is it possible that the old man was already wearing this coat when he entered this world? What has he done to dye a white coat completely red? When Chin-gu saw the old man for the first time, Chin-gu had a speculation in his mind. 3 years ago, the third sick hall's director had mysteriously disappeared, and his location had been a mystery ever since. There was no body and no news. This old man before him, be it from looks or age, fitted the director perfectly, so Chin-gu suspected that the old director did not disappear years ago but stepped into the door. He had read the few letters written by the old director, and in the last letter, the director did show traces of interest toward the world behind the door. But it was also because he had read those letters that Chin-gu had a good impression of the man. Therefore, he had a hard time overlapping the kind director in the letter with this red specter before him. Chin-gu shook his head to calm down. His knowledge of the director was based wholly on those few letters. No one would willingly slander themselves in their own writing, so the director in the letters might not perfectly represent the actual director. The thought of the electroshock therapy room, the crowded and dirty first sick hall, as well as the empty and deserted second sick hall made Chin-gu suck in a light breath, and he became more alert. Now do you understand what I mean? Do not wake the boy up. Put him down, and I'll bring you out of this nightmare. The old man's voice was soothing, and it would make others forget about the danger that he presented. Chin-gu slowly moved toward the door. I will not hurt the boy, but you have to tell me how to leave this place first. Show me your sincerity. Leaving is easy, you just need to step back over the door. Bang! The old man was interrupted by a loud boom. It sounded like a room had exploded somewhere in the third sick hall. Hearing this, the old man's face fell. His pale face twisted, and the forced kindness disappeared. What's going on? Chin-gu had a feeling that this was related to Zhanya. When the old man first entered the room, he had noticed how twisted his fingers were, and his arms had been crooked in an unnatural way. They were probably injured when they were blocking a powerful force. It's nothing, a small problem, the old man said darkly. He stood in the middle of the room and raised his head to look at Chin-gu. Give me the boy, and I'll bring you out. There was no extra expression on the white face. It freaked Chin-gu out. The old man had finally dropped his pretense. Send me out first or no deal. Chin-gu stood fast. His hand that held the cleaver was shaking because this was the first time he dealt directly with a red specter. You want to leave? Fine, come with me. The old man turned around, suddenly so helpful. This caused Chin-gu to grow suspicious. He followed slowly behind the old man, maintaining a distance of 3 meters between them. He was certain that with this 3-meter distance, no matter what the old man was up to, he would be able to react timely. However, he only took 2 steps when he realized that he had underestimated the red specter's cunning and cruelty. Technically, he only took 1 step because before he could take the second step, his foot that hung in midair froze. He could control it no longer. He lowered his head. When he was conversing with the old man, blood vessels that had seen earlier had crawled to his feet. Now the blood streaks were drilling into his skin like viruses. Don't you want to leave? Come with me. The old man turned around and rewarded Chin-gu with a wrinkly and creepy smile. Of course, Chin-gu did not dare follow him. He held the cleaver and wanted to take a step back, but the leg that hung in mid-air slowly moved forward. It's because of these blood vessels. Chin-ji's mind was numb from fear. He had no idea how many blood vessels had seeped into his left leg, and the scariest thing was, as the old man spoke, more blood vessels started to bleed out from the cracked walls and floor. Like little snakes, they slithered to Chingu. A normal person would have lost their cool and waved the cleaver about, but Chingu had something that was different to most: the ability to stay calm no matter how dangerous the situation was. As the blood vessels climbed up his body, Chingu's cleaver continued to press downward. The old man had purposely turned around earlier to trick Chingu, but he had turned around again to taunt him. The blade touched the skin, but there was no blood that trickled out from the wound. Weirdly enough, the blood vessels that the old man controlled seemed to go berserk whenever they were near to the boy, and they eventually returned to the boy's body through the open wound. The blood seems to belong the boy to begin with. Could it be that the old man has merely stolen his power? Chingu had discovered the old man's secret. He became braver. The cleaver created a larger wound, and the old man's scream drifted into Chingu's ears. The wound was created around the boy's collarbone, and the boy, whose eyelids had been twitching, suddenly gripped his fists, and his eyes flew open. The blood vessels in the room immediately split in two. A part of them continued to struggle as they retreated, while the remaining ones were absorbed by the boy into his body. "You madman! You've awoken the devil!" The old man's face turned paler. He turned to run, but he only took several steps before a large wave of black hair swamped through the corridor from the other side. The black hair slammed into the old man like a wave. A slender and fair arm materialized within the hair to grab on the old man's shoulder like it was trying to yank the old man into the wave of black hair. The old man was shaking, feeling the grasp on his shoulder. Obviously, he had suffered under the threat of this arm before. "I sent you out, why did you return?" The answer was a slam to the ground. The old man crashed heavily against the floor, and the red on his clothes dimmed quite a bit. "Zhanya is here." From what the old man said, it seemed he had also chased Zhanya out once, but Zhanya broke through the door again. "You came back to find me?" A warmth surged through Chingu. He was about to speak when he saw Zhanya walk out from the wave of hair. The girl did not even glance at him and walked straight toward the old man. In the quiet world behind the door, a blood-curdling scream could be heard. It caused Chingu's teeth to chatter. Are all baleful specters that prone to taking revenge? At his prime, the old man probably could have fought back, but he had been shocked by the boy's awakening and had half of his blood stolen by the boy, so when facing Zhanya, he was as powerless as level 0 mob. There should be further level differences among red specters as well, and this old man is probably one of the weakest red specter. Spotting Zhanya, Chingu's nervous heart started to relax. In this strange place, Zhanya was the only person who could give him comfort. After the situation settled down, Chingu wanted to switch into a more comfortable position. However, when he lowered his head, he saw a pair of curious eyeholes staring back at him. The clothes of the young boy in his arms had been dyed red without him noticing. His face was blanched, and his eyes were completely black, without pupils, iris, or anything else. Cold sweat slid down his forehead, and Chingu saw blood vessels climb back into the boy's body through the wound that was left on his neck. "I did that to wake you up, I had no choice. My intention wasn't to harm you." The boy hung on his body, and it seemed like he was trying to climb on top of him. It was quite scary having the body crawl up him. Chingu's first reaction was to push the boy away, but he was afraid that might cause further misunderstandings. "Men Nan, I know your name, and I came to save you. Your second persona was assaulted by a monster, it was me who saved him." Chingu was trying to win some points, but he was afraid that the boy might not give him the chance to say anything later. Earlier, the old man had called the boy the devil. To be able to be called the devil by a red specter, this meant that the boy was not as innocent as he looked. The boy did not stop moving until his face was inches away from Chingu's. At such a close distance, Chingu realized there were no eyes in the boy's eye sockets, simply two empty eye holes. Chingu did not know what the boy was looking for, and the hairs on his neck crawled. He reached into his pocket silently, took out the picture of Men Nan and his mother, and slid it between the two faces. I know about your past, and I understand your pain. If you need someone to talk to, you can tell me anything. Chin-gu repeated everything he had told the men Nan in real life. We have the same experience, so perhaps we can be friends. A man who knew no fear, this was the perfect phrase to describe Chin-gu. Even at a time like that, Chin-gu was thinking about recruiting the boy to work for him at the haunted house. When he saw his mother's picture, the boy's attitude softened. He released his grasp on Chin-gu and jumped down to the floor. Where did you find this picture? Men Nan in the real world had asked this question before. Their way of thinking was similar. In the director's dresser inside his office. He dared hide my mother's picture. The boy raised his head. Can you give me this picture? Sure. Chin-gu passed the picture to the boy. He could feel the boy's hostility toward him had decreased. He squatted down to the boy's level. After a moment's hesitation, he asked softly, just now, the old man said that this world is your nightmare, and after you wake up, the door that connects this place to the real world will close. Is that true? This world existed before me, and I'm merely the first one who discovered it. The boy pocketed the picture, and his hollow eyes looked at Chin-gu. Don't ask me anything about this world. The more you know, the harder it'll be for you to leave. The boy's intelligence was disproportionate to his appearance. Chin-gu had just spoken, but he had also figured out Chin-ji's angle. You cannot tell me anything. I can only say that this world is the reflection of human beings' darkest secrets. It is filled with sin and terror. It is similar to the real world but different, just like day and night. Then the boy walked out the door. The boy's red shirt was blinding. It seemed to be dripping in fresh blood. I still have 2 more questions. Don't move so fast. Chin-gu rushed forward. He had regained his agility, and the blood vessels that had seeped into his arms and legs earlier seemed to have disappeared. The boy stopped and turned around. His empty eyes studied Chin-gu closely. Aren't you afraid of me? I am, but I have some questions that need to be answered. The appearance of Men Nan's real persona was meaningful to Chin-gu. I want to ask about someone. Your second persona refers to him as Dr. Chen. Haven't heard of him. Your second persona once told me that you returned to the third sick hall because you were invited by 2 individuals. One of them was the old director and the other was this Dr. Chen. Chin-gu sounded sincere. This man is very important to me, he might be my missing family. Perhaps the word family had touched the boy. He moved his empty eyes away. This Dr. Chen is very common looking but has a special pair of eyes. He's similar to you, the exact type of person that I detest. That's all. Chin-gu was speechless before asking his second question. This door that connects the 2 worlds, how can I close it completely? Very simple. The boy smiled. Keep a living person behind the door and ask him to guard the door for you. What kind of solution is that? Chin-gu wanted to ask about the reason behind the appearance of the door, but the boy disappeared in the blink of an eye. Is he hiding some important information from me? Chin-gu was afraid that the boy might get into an altercation with Zhanya, so he hurried to follow the boy. After leaving the room, Chin-gu realized that the boy did not wander far. The boy's brows were deeply knitted together, and his dark eyes were looking forward. The red on the old man's coat had almost faded, and he barely had a human shape left. His remaining body was surrounded by Zhanya's black hair and would disappear in a few seconds. Leave me the old man's body, and I'll let you go. The boy was small, but Chin-gu felt the threat coming from his words. Her finger danced over her lips that were as bright as blood. Zhanya did not pay attention to what the boy said. With one leg on the director's broken body, she turned to look at the boy like she had spotted a new ingredient for dinner. Calm down. Chin-gu immediately ran to the middle of the corridor. We're all allies here, there's no need to harm each other. His back was drenched from being squeezed between 2 red specters. Chingu was shocked by this scene himself. Two red specters were going to fight it out, but he, a living human, was the mediator. Perhaps it was due to Chingu, neither the boy nor Zhangya made a move. In reality, the boy was already compromising. After he woke up, the blood vessels inside the third sick hall had continued to surge into his body, and the more he dragged this out, the more powerful he would become. I can give you the old man's body, but I must keep his head. There was a unique connection between the boy and the third sick hall. If the third sick hall was a monster, then he was the monster's child, so he had perfect control of the many things here. Many blood vessels appeared on the surface of the corridor, and they curled themselves around the old man's neck. The old man, who had surrendered to his fate, suddenly opened his eyes and started to struggle. Unfortunately, Zhangya's feet were still on his body, so he could not even move. The blood vessels drilled into the old man's neck, and the image that happened next was a bit gory. The old man's scream reverberated down the hall. The blood vessels formed tentacles of sorts and transported the old man's head to the boy. What kind of mistake has the old man made? Chingu was past feeling pity for the man. After all, he did try to kill him earlier. When the door was first opened, the man used the patients as test subjects. The boy's hollow eyes looked at the head in his arms. He forced the patients to enter the door, and that included my mother. The boy hugged the man's head and was smiling sweetly. He is a very fake and selfish man. The reason I fell asleep was because of him and a few of his patients. Him and a few patients? There are other people inside the door. Chingu nudged toward Zhangya. He felt safer being close to Zhangya. I promised Dr. Chen that I would guard the door after entering it. However, 5 years ago, the door was forced open from the outside. The boy started to explain what happened 5 years ago. The old man suffered from cancer, and he knew that he wasn't going to live for long. To extend his life, he turned his interest toward the world behind the door. But he was scared, so like so many years ago, he sent a few patients into the door first. The third sick hall was a quarantine building, and the patients there had no family or background, so the whole process was very hush-hush. After 1 week of trials and making sure that there was no danger, the director entered the door with a few patients. The smile hung on the boy's face as he petted the old man's screaming head. After the door closed, this place became my world, and there is nothing inside the third sick hall that can harm me. I didn't want to harm them, I just wanted to find something to do after so many years of boredom. However, to my surprise, to escape, these people opened the door for the monsters to enter the third sick hall. Some of them even got possessed by these monsters. When I discovered this, it was already too late. They trapped me inside the electroshock therapy room and had the dying director look over me while the others escaped with the sin and terror. After listening to the boy, Chingu nodded. I've seen several patients of the third sick hall in the real world. A thin monster possessed each of them. The old man said that they were a manifestation of human desire. Indeed, those are creatures that originated from inside the door, but they are also the weakest. The boy's words scared Chingu. The thin monster was the weakest, but he had always thought that the mirror monster was the weakest. 5 years ago, 7 patients entered the door, and 4 of them were possessed by the weakest monsters. As for the other 3, I couldn't tell. The boy glanced at Chingu. The fact that you're here means that you've fought with them already. The remaining ones might seek you out for trouble. Can you tell me about the 3 that are most dangerous? There's an incredibly beautiful woman, a man with a ruined face, and the last one is called Wu Fei. The boy's teeth gritted together when he said Wu Fei's name. It was this Wu Fei who came up with the plan to trap me. Then, the boy added, but Wu Fei is not the most difficult to deal with. You have to be careful about the ruined face, he's the most dangerous. Thank you for the reminder. There's no need to thank me because I have a favor to ask of you. The boy had observed Chingu for a long time and finally voiced his real purpose. I am just a persona, and this third sick hall behind the door is my host. Since I've been here for so long, from a certain perspective, you can say my consciousness has joined with the building. Outsiders cannot kill me, they can only weaken me and make me fall asleep. They cannot kill me, but they can influence me by harming my second persona. In fact, they might be able to control me through him. That is what I'm most worried about, so, if needed, please help me protect my second persona. I have no family left in that world, and he is my only friend. No problem. I am friends with your second persona as well, so I will never not help him. Chungu tried to befriend the boy and wished that one day he would be able to hire him as one of his workers. His haunted house needed someone of his age. Hopefully, you'll hold on to your promise. The boy carried the old man's head to room 3. Staying too long in this world will damage your spirit and body. It'll be filled by negative thoughts. If you stay long enough, you too will go insane. He pushed the door to room 3 open and placed the old man's head beside the bed. I'll send you off. If there's any problem, you can come find me at midnight. I'll hold the door open for 1 minute. Why 1 minute? Chen Ji's eyes twitched. That's the limit of my control, the boy answered. This world is huge, and there are many other doors. Some doors, like this one, are guarded by people, and some are left unattended. Normally speaking, if there is someone guarding the door, the time of door opening will be 1 minute. Okay, I understand. Chungu lowered his head, thinking about the door in his haunted house. When both Chungu and Zhangya walked into room 3, the boy closed the door. He stood beside the door. You can go back now. But how? The boy pointed at the door of room 3. Push it open, you only have 1 minute. Chungu still had many questions, but the boy did not give him any chance and started the countdown. He could see that the boy was also struggling. His body had not fully recovered, and the blood on his clothes was fading. Stop wasting my time, go. When he walked closer, Chungu realized that the door was filled with small cracks, and there were plenty of blood vessels weaving through it to fix the wounds. He was reminded of the loud bang that accompanied Zhangya's appearance. He thought about it. After being sent out by the old man, Zhangya burst through the door again. Looks like the door can be broken, but it'll repair itself. Pushing the door open, the world that greeted him was no longer in shades of red, and Chungu found the darkened corridor to be quite comforting. Meow. A white cat squatted beside the door. It turned to look at Chungu, its multicolored eyes shining with intrigue. After exiting the door, Chungu wanted to turn to thank the boy, but the boy slammed the door shut in his face. I have a feeling the boy is hiding something, but what is it? Is he afraid of Zhangya? The red school uniform that fluttered in the wind appeared in Chen Ji's mind, and he shivered. This 3-star trial mission had given him a new understanding of Zhangya. The red specter Zhangya was a complete opposite of the person she had been when she was alive. She was cruel and unforgiving. She shattered the door and would attack anyone who dared stand in her way. Zhangya should have exited the door with me, right? Chungu turned to look, and Zhangya was standing 1 foot away from him. The red on her uniform was brighter than before. Chen Ji's fingers twitched like they were spasming, and Chungu let out an awkward laugh to hide how panicked he was. Just look at how funny this whole thing is. I went inside the door because I was worried about you, but in the end, it was you who saved me. Zhangya was silent as she studied Chen Ji's face carefully. Chungu was frozen solid under her scrutiny. He was trying to figure out a way to lighten the mood when he realized that, in the 20 or so years he had been alive, his experience of talking with girls was 0. What have I been doing for the past 20 years? Finally, Chungu squeezed out the following. The things here have been dealt with. Let's go home. Zhangya did not answer but took a step forward. When her face was almost touching Chen Ji's, she suddenly increased in speed to phase through Chen Ji's body before entering his shadow. The black phone in his pocket vibrated, and Chengu leaned against the wall before sliding down it. His forehead was already covered in cold sweat. The pressure Zhang Yi gave him was too high. Is that an alert that the mission has been completed? After taking a deep breath, Chengu took out the phone and opened the alert. Zhang Yi's affection level increased slightly. Soon, it will break through to the next level gripped by passion. The alert that appeared on screen made Chengu suck in a deep breath. Gripped by passion, why does it sound so dangerous? Will Zhang Yi accidentally tear me apart when she is in the throes of passion? Chengu hugged his head and groaned painfully from the terror. The white cat jumped onto his backpack and lay down lazily. It seemed like it had gotten used to the various weird antics of its owner. In any case, there's no need to worry about that yet. Chengu stood up, and after taking a look at his phone, he saw that all signals had been cut off after he entered the door. Then, he remembered his live stream. He entered the platform and saw that his own live stream had been temporarily banned, but his account was not frozen. He could still comment like normal. What's going on? He glanced at the viewer count. With this one live stream, his number of followers had shot up to 150,000. Click into any bigger live stream, and they would be talking about Chengu and Qin Guang's stories. Chengu calmed himself down and went searching for Qin Guang's live stream. The man's stream was blocked as well. What's happening? Chengu called Lu Dao, and it was picked up after 7 rings. Lu Dao. Why are my live stream and Qin Guang's live stream both blocked? Is it because of the overly long black screen? After a few seconds, an unknown male voice replied, "This is the city's investigation team. Give me your location immediately. Stay where you are, and don't move around." The police? When did they get here, and how did they know I'm at the 3rd Sick Hall? Chengu glanced at the time. It was already 3:50 a.m. He had only been inside the door for a short time, but time had passed by so fast in the real world. After his live stream was cancelled when he entered the door, Lu Dao's team had probably called the police. Unlike those online viewers, Lu Dao understood how dangerous things could be and knew Chen Ji's exact location. I'm at the mental hospital's 3rd building 1st floor. There are 2 victims trapped inside the 2nd building's laundry room, and I've collected evidence of the suspects. The 2 victims have been rescued. Don't ruin the crime scene. We'll be there in a minute, keep the line open. My phone is dying, so I'm afraid it won't hold out for long. Chengu then hung up. He immediately hid the hammer and cleaver. I have to take the thing inside the director's dresser too. He raced to the 2nd floor office. When he grabbed the letters inside the dresser, Chengu accidentally found the dresser's secret. The partition at the back of the dresser could be opened, and it led to a hidden passageway. At the end of the passageway was a steel door. The door's lock fitted the key Chengu had. After unlocking it and pushing the door open, Chengu was surprised to find himself back in room 3. This should be the secret tunnel mentioned by Wang Haiming in room 3. This passageway is connected to the director's office, so the old man definitely knew about it. Looking at the patient's bed, which faced the hidden passageway, Chengu was reminded of Men Nan's mother who stayed in this room, and he had a rough idea of why the boy tormented the old director. Wang Haiming was once a resident of room 3, and this key was probably stolen from the director with the cooperation of the mirror ghost. The police were coming soon, so Chengu pocketed the key, returned everything back to how it had been, and sat quietly inside the room, waiting for the police to arrive. Before Chengu got near, the police surrounded him. Chengu had not seen any of these faces before. I'm a friend. I found these things left behind by the suspects. After a short interrogation, Chengu explained why he was at the 3rd Sick Hall. He removed the things related to ghosts and said that he was chased by the twisted face and ended up being locked by the crazy people inside the 3rd Sick Hall. The suspects' fingerprints were left on the 4th floor's steel door. They are 3 of them, they were all once patients at this third sick hall. He struggled to stay awake until dawn, and after receiving the mission success alert on the black phone, Chen-gu left the mental hospital with the police. "Get in, and don't act funny." Chen-gu slipped into the police car, hugging the chicken and cat. From the tone of the policeman, he realized that things might have gotten a little serious this time. "Thank God, you're okay." There was another person sitting in the back seat. His face was tense, but his voice was familiar. "Lu Dao. Why are you here? Was it you who called the police?" Sitting inside the police car, Chen-gu felt oddly comfortable. He was not only not worried, and he felt like falling asleep. Also, why was the live stream banned? What was the highest viewership tonight? Because my follower number has increased to 150,000. Why do you still care about the live stream? Lu Dao grabbed Chen Ji's arm. "Brother, didn't you say that all the people in the mental hospital are actors from the haunted house? I've vouched for you in front of the cops, but you've pushed me into the pits of hell. But there are my workers in the mental hospital, you just are unable to see them." Chen-gu was not ashamed of his words. For this live stream, he had brought the pen spirit, Xiao Xiao, and the white cat out from the haunted house. "I didn't mean to blame you," just Lu Dao's face fell. "Never mind, it's my fault for not taking more precautions, and to be fair, many viewers were tricked by you." "What are you talking about? Mind explaining it to me?" Chen-gu wanted to pet the white cat's head but was warned off by the cat's cruel gaze. Lu Dao shrugged. "Normally, when a person enters a mental hospital in the middle of the night and sees victims trapped inside cages and murderers pursuing him with axes, wouldn't that person be afraid? Yes, fear is the appropriate reaction. But the problem is, you chased the murderers up and down the building with a large hammer for at least 20 minutes. No matter who sees this, they'll think it's a setup, right?" Lu Dao was at the verge of a breakdown. "I've been in the live stream business for 4 years already, and until now, I never thought that someone would go chase after a real murderer. Weren't you afraid? Is your brain filled with lead?" "You're exaggerating. I was just doing what a lawful citizen would," Chen-gu emphasized. "To be honest, I have a strong sense of justice. When I saw the victims, I was angered by how much pain they'd been through, and the anger overwhelmed my fear. That's why I dared to chase after those murderers." Chen-gu was loud, and the two policemen in front could hear him clearly. "It's too late to say anything now. This is all my fault. I should have called the police earlier." Lu Dao massaged his temples. "When you started the live stream, there was already a report. At the time, I thought that it was people from Qingguang's side playing tricks, so I ignored it. Then, when your viewership rose to 400,000, someone demanded that we call the police, and I had my men suppress the motion. Finally, when your live stream went over 600,000 and broke the record for any newbie host, I had a very bad feeling. You started to scream and wave that cleaver at the air. I thought that it was some kind of performance, and due to personal greed, I forced Sister Lee to continue the broadcast. It was not until you entered that sick room and the screen went black that I realized the gravity of the situation and called the police." There was a trace of relief in his voice. "So be it. No matter what, at least you're safe now." Lu Dao sighed, removed a small pill bottle from his shirt, and popped 2 pills into his mouth. "What are those?" "Pills for angina. Give me some peace. This is my first time inside a police car, so I need to calm myself." After they arrived at the city police station, Lu Dao and Chen-gu were led into different interrogation rooms. The police questioned him on all the details. Chen-gu stuck to his earlier explanation. He accidentally ran into a conspiracy, and to protect the victim, he chose to resist and fight back. The whole process was broadcasted, and that was all the evidence Chen-gu needed. The thing that was most difficult for the police was, all evidence pointed to the fact that Chen-gu was also one of the victims, but this victim had chased after the culprits aggressively. After the interrogation, the police did not show any sign that they were going to let him go. "Mr. Chen, we need to have a meeting to discuss your situation." "Okay, but can you give me back my phone? I wish to call my family to tell them that I'm safe." Chen Gu actually wanted to call Inspector Li for help. This time, things were different. His live stream was no longer limited to a small circle. It had broken 600,000 viewers. In other words, the situation had gotten a bit out of hand. "Please wait patiently." The police officer rejected Chen Ji's request and left the interrogation room. It was not until noon that the door opened again. Chen Gu, who had been fully cooperative, turned to look at the door. A slightly fat police stood at the door. He wore a uniform that was different from others. "Captain Yen." Chen Gu was surprised. It was this officer who had presented his medal when Chen Gu helped solve the case at Ping An Apartments. "Follow me, someone wants to meet you." Different from last time, Captain Yan's expression was severe. Chen Gu stood up slowly and wondered, "Am I going to meet some big character?" After exiting the interrogation room, they walked down the corridor before stopping outside a room. Through the glass window, Chen Gu looked in. The girl who had been trapped inside the cage was safe. She was wearing the police outfit someone had given her, and she cowered in a corner of the room, hugging a bottle of water. She was shivering non-stop and would not communicate with anyone. She did not even dare to sit on the chair. Standing not far from her was a middle-aged man, and this was the first time Chen Gu had seen a man break down so completely. The middle-aged man appeared to be the girl's father. He was calling the girl's name, but she did not give any response. She was still shrouded in fear. "Go in, the father wants to meet you." When he walked in, the middle-aged father immediately rushed to Chen Gu. His emotions were running so high that he could not even finish a complete sentence. About 10 minutes later, Captain Yen and Chen Gu left the room. "Earlier, we were all discussing about you, to determine whether what you've done has broken the law or not. At the end of the discussion, I also brought them here." Captain Yen looked at the pair in the room. "If not for you, the girl would have spent the rest of her life inside a cage and the father would have spent his looking for his only family in this world." Chen Gu had a hard time controlling his emotions. Even though the girl was safe now, it would take a long time before the scar on her heart was healed. "You've done good this time." Captain Yen turned to Chen Gu. "After our discussion, we decided to temporarily ban your live stream, but as compensation, we'll award you a record of merit." Instead of a punishment, banning Chen Ji's live stream temporarily was more like a protection. This was to prevent Chen Gu from being used by others due to his newfound popularity. As for that record of merit, Chen Gu did not know what it was. But since Captain Yen had specifically mentioned it, it should be a good thing. "Thank you, but I was merely acting on my sense of justice. Sometimes, I just cannot control myself." Chen Gu was not sure. After all, what he did yesterday night was rash. He had been armed with a cleaver and a hammer, and he had broken a culprit's leg with the hammer. "Then, can I really go now? Don't try to get information from me." Captain Yen pointed at his uniform. "We will not cheer for violence, but never will we punish a good conscience and sense of justice."